Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is the regular meeting of the Select Board for February 25th, 2025. And this will be a joint meeting of the Select Board, the Advisory Committee, and our newly formed Expenses and Revenue Study Committee. The main purpose of this meeting is to receive a report on the financial plan presented by the Town Administrator, Chaz Carey, and the Deputy Town Administrator, Melissa Goff. After the presentation of the financial plan, we will take questions and comments from the Select Board, the Advisory Committee, and the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee. But before any of that, we have some regular business to which we must attend. Starting off with any announcements or updates from the Select Board. Paul?
Yeah, I get just a couple quick ones. I'm going to make an announcement, then I'll make a brief statement. So at this time of year, we go through a review of the budget extensively. We'll start with that tonight. But I do want the public to know that the Advisory Committee also holds public hearings on each of the departmental budgets. And I was on the Advisory Committee for a couple of years and sat through many of those budget hearings, and they're not often well attended by residents. And I think that could be because people don't know about it. These are listed on the town calendar. I think both John and I, have included those in our weekly newsletters that we send out email-wise. A number of people do receive those. I highlighted a couple that are taking place this week. On Wednesday, the Public Safety Subcommittee is looking at holding a public hearing on the police budget, which is always often is attended by folks. The Human Services Subcommittee is also looking at the Veterans Services budget, which is important. And they're also going to be on Thursday looking at holding a public hearing on the library budget. So these are it's an important time to pay attention because this is an opportunity for the public to be able to voice their ideas, their concerns, support or otherwise for the specific departmental budgets. And often the Advisory Committee will take input and make adjustments and recommendations at town meeting. Not major ones, but they do make some impactful changes. So that's my first. I would encourage the public to attend those. It is an important time of year. And of course, we'll have some discussions tonight about the budget, which includes the school budget deficit. And being the only Select Board member with children in the school system, I have a first grader at Lawrence and a fifth grader at Lawrence. I have received more calls than I can tell you. I've had many conversations about the subject of the deficit with the schools. It's deeply concerning to my wife and I as parents of K through 8 children. And I have shared my concerns directly with school committee members about the level of cuts and the type of cuts that are taking place. I've made suggestions, which I won't announce here, as to where I think there may be opportunities, but I do want to encourage the community to let the process work. The school committee is going through their process of identifying ways to adjust their budget to be more in line with what is being allocated by the town school partnership. I know that we have work already being done by our staff to help close the gap for FY 26 through some adjustments with the CIP allocation. And I just want to encourage everybody to let that process work out. We go through this process, unfortunately, every year. There's typically a gap between what the schools kind of look at for what they want holistically and then what the realities of our financial ability is. And there's usually a meeting of the minds. So for that, I'm supportive and appreciate everything that the town is doing, and also the school committee and specifically the parents and educators who are coming and raising concerns, advocating for our great school system, which is important for our community, whether you have children in the school system or not. So that's my thoughts on the issue. Thank you.
Michael.
Thanks, Bernard. Different subject. Although I do think, Paul's comments about inviting people to attend advisory committee, especially advisory subcommittee hearings on the budget, is a very good one. I hope people will take us up on that, take him up on that. We have a Center Street parking lot study committee in the process of being formed, and we've received something on the order of 20 or 20 more than 20 applications from people interested in serving on that. And I was hoping that we would be able to have a slate available for the select board on March 4th. But a number of the applications came from people who have not served previously on town committees, so they're not familiar to me or to staff, and yet they have some really impressive CVs. And so we're doing a few interviews, which will take us another week or so. And so I think we'll probably appear on the select board agenda for the last week in March rather than on the 4th. But in the process, I hope that we'll be able to bring in some people who haven't participated before and who look very qualified.
Great, thank you. John.
Two announcements. And the first one is all about a presentation that's going to be made at what we like to refer to as the Brookline Village Public Library, the main public library here. So this is at the Brookline Village Public Library, and it is this coming Saturday, March 1st. It's at 2 p.m. And the quick story behind the speaker who will be presented is that in 2020, I made the decision, for better or for worse, to run for this select board. And the first thing that happened when that became public was I got a phone call from someone who said, I've been thinking about running for select board, and maybe we should sit down and have coffee. And I from that moment, I sort of admired this guy, and I continue to admire him. He's a very interesting guy, Eric Hyatt. He's an author. He has done a lot of interesting volunteer work in his life. He's done a lot of interesting professional work in his life. And he has offered to entertain people on Saturday, March 1st at 2 p.m. By talking about scenes from a Brookline childhood. It's part of the series Speaking from the Heart. So Eric Hyatt, Saturday, March 1st, 2 p.m. at the Brookline Village Library. The other bit of news is that there was a Brookline officer involved in what turned out to be, thankfully, not a really serious incident. He was in directing traffic on Newton Street on Monday morning, and he was struck by a car. Fortunately, he will recover from the injuries that he received. And that is Officer Michael Mitchick, and he is recovering at this point. But it was nice to see that his fellow officers were very quick to respond and to both wish him a full recovery from his injuries, but also to honor him for his work and to thank the Brookline Fire Department, the ambulance, Beth Israel Medical, for their responses. So Michael Mitchick, we're looking forward to seeing you back on the street very soon. And we're all very thankful that it was not a more serious incident, and we wish you well.
Thank you, John, and thank you for mentioning that incident. Many of our town employees, police, of course, probably primary ones, but many other town employees put themselves in danger when doing the town's work. And we should, be aware of that and appreciate it when they recover and are able to come back to work. So, any other comments from the select board? Chaz.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it is a busy comments period. Two medium-length things. One is a positive thing. We're really happy to announce that the Recreation Department has won 2 statewide awards from the Massachusetts Recreation and Parks Association Conference. One of them is for an individual employee, Melanie Pimentel, who's our certified therapeutic recreation specialist. Won an award because of her inclusive programming. She oversees one of the largest Special Olympics chapters in Massachusetts. She facilitates in-house programs, social skill building outings. She's a really incredible employee, and I'm really glad that she was recognized for her work at the conference this year. The department as a whole won Agency of the Year for commitment to outstanding programming specifically through the Equity Initiative. The Equity Initiative has provided 1,734 registrations across all areas of the department, including childcare, aquatics, summer camps, youth sports. It demonstrates that rec can serve as a real bridge for equity in the community and allows individuals of all backgrounds to participate. So I want to thank the Recreation Department, the Parks and Recreation Commission, all the staff and all the members of the community, particularly the Warrant Article 26 committee from several years ago that pioneered this equity initiative, that made all this possible and got all these awards noticed. So congratulations to the rec team, to Melanie, and to the community. It's a really great honor and exciting to see where rec goes from here. The other thing I wanted to just bring up, I got a letter this week. I got an anonymous letter. I love when I get anonymous letters. I'm just going to read it and then I want to comment on it. Dear Mr. Carey, as Brookline residents, we are pleading with you / the town to cool it with the ongoing establishing opening of Asian restaurants.
Oh my God.
We pay a lot of money to live in this town. We want some variety. We are totally confused by the influx of only this type of dining, only in all caps. Please, please allow for some other options for those of us who do not and cannot live solely on Asian fusion. We are growing so bored. Our visitors are growing bored. This town is in desperate need of some variety. We are actually baffled by this. Please consider taking steps to aid us in this request. Thank you. I want people to know about this because, one, I think there's sometimes an assumption that, oh, racism isn't a problem anymore. And well, it is. But two, I want to link it more broadly to an issue that has been of great concern to the community, which is the federal government's newfound hostility to what it calls DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The current administration has steered away from offering a definition of what that means. The closest it's come is in its instructions to schools, where it says you can't take anyone's background into account anymore for any reason. No affinity clubs, no specialized housing, no admissions, so on. And their stated reason for doing so is to achieve a quote unquote meritocracy. Now, even if you leave aside that the United States has never successfully implemented a meritocracy, when you look at what they're actually doing, I don't think you can argue their staffing decisions are based on merit. Instead, I see a lot of people with what I'll call unorthodox backgrounds, disproportionately white, disproportionately men, appointed at the behest of two billionaires who sell themselves as business geniuses, but in fact use their father's money to develop a media narrative that they're smarter than they are. People don't always know, for example, Elon Musk isn't actually the co-founder of Tesla. He won that in a settlement with the actual co-founders. But let's circle back to this letter. The fact that it's anonymous suggests that the authors knew how it would be taken. But I'm willing to bet that I'll get a follow-up letter from them, excoriating me for putting them on blast and swearing that they don't have a racist bone in their bodies. They'll probably claim, as the current administration does, that they just want things based on merit, a merit that they happen to define as offering less of a certain type of cuisine. So let me engage with the premise briefly in the hopes that we might understand each other better. Not only would it be incredibly illegal for me to deny a license to someone on the basis of the food that they serve, it's unmeritocratic. Our licenses are available regardless of cuisine, and we're excited to have you be a part of this community if you choose to open a business here. And as for the complaint that the town is in desperate need of some variety, I would like to invite the authors of this letter to take a walk through Brookline Village with me. The variety of restaurants that's just serving just what I consider to be Asian food is remarkable. We got 3 Sichuan places, each with very different concepts, 2 Thai restaurants, again with very different concepts, a new Thai bar, Japanese pub, and a vegetarian Indo-Chinese restaurant that also offers pizza, just in case you're bored. But if none of those entice you, don't worry. We have 3 other pizza places, a family Italian restaurant, a classic diner, a Mexican street cuisine place, some coffee shops, a very popular sandwich shop, a Turkish restaurant, an American fare pub, and an ice cream place for dessert. And again, those are just places that I could remember off the top of my head in Brookline Village. You'll find similar diversity in Washington Square, Coolidge Corner, St. Mary's, and elsewhere. If you're in desperate need of some variety, maybe you just need to get out more. I'll buy you lunch. Come on down. I want to close by reiterating something because this letter, upset me. Intolerance, even when dressed up in meritocracy or whatever the buzzwords of the current administration wants to use, is not acceptable. Now, not everything has to be a big social justice struggle session. We're not always going to get everything right. We're not going to jump down the throats of people who get things wrong. But if we can just use our common sense values in being welcoming to our neighbors, then maybe we'll be able to get through this difficult period. So I hope that we can continue to be a welcoming community, regardless of people's backgrounds, the food they eat, the people they love, what they look like, etc. So sorry for the big long to-do, but I don't like it when I get anonymous letters like this. So thank you.
I'd like to sort of connect that to what you read earlier about the Brookline Recreation Program. I mean, that's an example of how, when we talk about equity, we're talking about incorporating into our life, our civic life, people who, in the absence of an equity effort, would just not be allowed to participate. And what the problem with that is that we lose their brain power, we lose their creativity, we lose everything that they can offer to the community. And that is not meritocracy. If we're losing the people who really are capable of providing those that brain power to the community, that's not meritocracy. And of course, as Chaz said, the current administration clearly is not interested in meritocracy if you look at the selection of people in the cabinet and elsewhere. But, last year at the high school, there was a graduate, and I forgot her name, but she was a woman in a wheelchair who was severely handicapped. And I posted this on Facebook because it's really moving that despite her disabilities, she was brilliant in math. Remember Stephen Hawking? So, she, did well in math at the high school and went on to UMass Boston in math. That's an example of how by using equitable principles, meaning giving an opportunity, breaking down barriers for people, that we can capture as something that will be a huge benefit to all of us. She may be the next Stephen Hawking, and maybe she'll save our planet from the disaster it's heading towards now. But I think those two things are connected, and people who complain about, I mean, that's a silly letter, but that type of complaint sort of misses the point of equity, inclusion, and diversity. So those are my 2 cents. Any other comments or questions? Okay, public comment. Tiffany, let us or tell us the rules and let's open up for public comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Before I do, I just wanted to point out that we have received a number of folks who signed up in advance for public comment. If you are in the room and wish to make a public comment and did not sign up in advance, please sign up at the sheet in front of the room. If you're online, you'll raise your hand using the raise a hand feature, and I'll go over that. I also wanted to point out that we do have a public hearing on the ground floor commercial incentives. If you are speaking on that item, we ask that you reserve those comments to that public hearing. Thank you for joining us for public comment. This is an opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. Each person speaking tonight is limited to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time, but you may if you like. Once 15 minutes has been met, there is an opportunity at the conclusion of the Select Board's business for additional comments. Members of the public sometimes raise questions during public comment. We may be able to provide a quick answer to a question, but are more likely to work with staff to get a more thorough answer and respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. Please conclude your remarks at that time. If you have more to say, you're welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. Any person wishing to speak must begin their comment by identifying themselves with their full name and either their Brookline precinct number or street address. The first individual who signed up to speak tonight is Richard Murphy.
Evening. My name is Richard Murphy, town meeting member in precinct 16. And before I say anything, I want to thank Chaz. My spouse is Chinese, so I resonate with the, so thank you. But I'm here to speak in favor of agenda item 3J, which is funding for a comprehensive roadway study for safe bike lanes for South Brookline to Brookline High School, to support our students and basically provide safe bikeways for them to get from point A, South Brookline, to Brookline High School and back. Town meeting member Deb Abner and I, Deb is a Lincoln school teacher, and I have been advocating for a safe roadway study with our comprehensive plan. This plan has collaborated with the transportation department and engineering staff, State Rep Tommy Vitello and Bill McGregor, fellow town meeting members, neighbors, and countless meetings with different committees and groups. Deb Abner and I would like to thank Amy Ingles, Transportation Administrator, and Sam Dowes of the engineering to bringing this study forward and with the requested funding and bringing more awareness to this roadway, which travels all the way like from Hancock Village to Brookline High School. We created the Baker Bike Bus. And with this, I'd like to thank those supporters, those adults that had joined the students to basically provide protection and safest guidance. I'd like to be able to thank Amy Ingles, who joined us one time, State Rep Tommy Vitello, high school teacher Eric Colburn, Chair of the Transportation Board, Brian Kane, also Transportation Member Len Holy, fellow town meeting member and advisory member Jocelyn Murphy and Perry Grossman, and also resident Garrett Lawson. But most of all, I want to thank the students and Myra and Audrey, who are two fantastic juniors at Brookline High School, who really show great leadership and really inspire people, inspired me to basically approach this subject and to really kind of do something to provide safe bike lanes from South Brookline to Brookline High School. So thank you for allowing me to speak. Have a good evening. I'm looking for favorable action on this funding for the tool design company. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Justin Brown.
Good evening, members of the Select Board. I am Justin Brown. I'm the president of the Brookline Educators Union, representing over 1,200 paraprofessionals, teachers, and administrators in the public schools of Brookline. I rise in support of our members to say that we are tired, frustrated, and angry at, once again, as was earlier mentioned, finding ourselves facing a budgetary shortfall and the potential loss of positions, programs, and quality educators. Any of the proposed budget cuts to the budget, including an outrageous effort to generate revenue from a hike in the materials fee program, and the efforts to further privatize the jobs of our union siblings who deliver basic needs to our students, nourishing food and clean, safe schools, will have a disastrous impact on the public schools of Brookline. You'll hear a little about that tonight and more in the days to come of what exactly these impacts will be. To be clear, we are saying no to any cuts. I also rise to support the proposed budget of $149.9 million that the superintendent has presented, and urge you as members of the town's executive body to do the following. Move funds from certified free cash and any new stabilization fund deposits instead to the school department to plug the $8.2 million gap. Our analysis provides reasons why this is possible. First, in Brookline over the past several years, there's been a steady decline in school spending as a proportion of overall spending and out of line with peer communities. Second, the stabilization fund goal of 10% is out of line with state recommendations of 5 to 7%. This kind of prioritization comes on the backs of our educators and students. Additionally, Brookline is generating certified free cash that is twice the state recommendation of 3 to 5%. The town's pattern of underestimating local receipts to generate a growing amount of free cash means that there is more money that could be going to the schools that is not. Third, Brookline's residential tax rate is in the lowest quarter among all municipalities in the state, despite having the second highest single-family home values. If Brookline levied its property at the state's
30
median
seconds.
rate, our back of the napkin calculations show that tens of millions of dollars of extra revenue would be generated. We know what we're going to hear, that one-time money should go to one-time expenses and that Brookline's rainy day fund should not be touched, but we're here to tell you that it's raining, it's pouring. We are continually asked to do more with less, and hearing from all corners of our school community that any of the proposed cuts will have a disastrous impact on our educators, our students, and the schools of Brookline. Let's do right by
Thank you. That
all of
concludes
them
your time.
and fund our schools so that all can thrive. Thank you.
The next speaker is Elisa Connor.
Elisa Connor, Spanish teacher at Brookline High School for 24 years, graduate class of 1990, parent of a Brookline High junior, and homeowner, resident, and taxpayer. Let's not forget Orinoco, which is a great Venezuelan restaurant in Brookline Village. So, amen. And Nandita Rahman was my student. So I also celebrate her. And to my point, the February 13th budget cut presentation suggests that making cuts, quote, without impacting the overall quality of student services. I want to make clear, this is impossible. You cannot make these cuts without affecting the quality of what we do. I'm only going to speak to class size. We know class size is one of the single most important drivers of student achievement. My classes are 25 and above, typically. These days and this year, this is significantly increased from 10 years, 15 and 20 years ago. That means I'm less able to provide one-on-one support, less able to offer timely and actionable feedback, less able to adapt curriculum in response to the needs of my students, including Nandita, who required a lot of one-on-one adaptation. Raising my class sizes even more means setting me up for more failure and my students up for less success. These cuts mean we are in danger of losing the brainpower and creativity that we value with the diversity of our community. Nandita required a one-on-one para in order to thrive. If we cut paras, we prevent the thriving of our current and future Nanditas. Failing to hire and maintain the staff our students actually need to support them equals failing our students. We get what we pay for, and we don't get what we don't pay for. I'm so glad that we attend to our bond rating and our rainy day funds. And also, funding our schools is an investment in the short and long-term thriving of our community, keeps my property values high, serves as a vital foundation for our thriving. So we have solutions, as Justin alluded to, release certified free cash funds that we have to fully fund the schools, commit to regular overrides with vigorous support from town leaders so that we don't keep failing to invest and have this gap year after year. Looking at how my property taxes might more accurately reflect the actual resources of our town so we can all pay our fair share. I know it's complicated, but the average of our residential property taxes includes some uber wealthy properties, and
30 seconds.
overall, we pay less than many other communities. Last point, let us reframe this full funding, not as some kind of costly sinkhole, but and regrettable, but as an investment with a high rate of return. I want more efficiency, transparency, and accountability. These budget cuts don't get us there. If we choose not to fully invest in our school system, we're choosing a decline in the quality of education in Brookline for which families moved here, and we're choosing to hurt our students. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kristen Wheeler.
Everybody, my name is Kristen Wheeler, and I'm a literacy specialist at FRR. This meeting is way more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And I love the idea of the bike path because I actually am a bike commuter and I live in Roslindale and I would love to have safe routes to school. So I'm in support of that for sure. So I'm following Justin and Elisa with a similar request. I'm up here to request funding for the schools. And I think everybody probably saw the latest school committee bulletin. I know that several of us were watching the meeting last week when they suggested a number of cuts, which of course is heartbreaking to all of us. I'm really standing up here to talk about, I could talk at length about so many of them, but I really want to talk about one summer program for kindergarten through fifth graders. It's called Project Discovery. And this is one of the proposals to be cut. And I've been involved with this program for many years. I was the director of it and I also have taught in it. So what I want to read, one of the literacy specialists from Baker submitted a letter to town administration, really begging them to continue funding for it. So I paraphrased from the letter and I hope you hear the words and they have some meaning to you. So last summer, this program served around 220 students. It has been an effective, if not life-changing experience for many students and families in Brookline. Project Discovery is a bridge that tethers students and families to the reading experience without pause. It's a lifeline that ensures that not only do students not lose ground in reading and writing over the summer, but that they have successful reading experiences that give them confidence for the coming year. It really provides a huge support system for families. It offers not just academic hope, but also practical solutions to navigate the complexities of summer schedules. A lot of kids that aren't in the summer program are going to be at home on screens, not involved in the enriching activities that is provided for them. So even though it's a summer program, it really is an integral part of our district reading program because it ensures it prevents reading and writing loss over the summer.
30
So-
seconds.
Okay, last thing I'm going to say, I have some words from Brookline teachers about the program and what it's meant for them and for their students. So Katie Stoll is a literacy specialist from Lincoln. She said, the rising first graders I work with at Project Discovery not only maintain skills, but gain skills during the program, giving them a stronger start to their first grade year. Jeanette Sargent, a guidance counselor at Baker, says this program helps a lot of under-resourced families
Thank you. That concludes your time.
who do not have the funds to pay for private academic tutoring, etc. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. The next speaker is John Ferguson.
Good evening, members of the Select Board. I'm John Ferguson. I am an instrumental music teacher in Brookline. I work at all the elementary schools. I am here to ask you to fully fund the $149.9 million budget presented by the superintendent. The alternative, as you've been hearing and as you know, is to make cuts to our programs that will be disastrous for student learning. And I am just here to give you a perspective on one of the proposed cuts, which is the suggestion to completely eliminate our instrumental music program, also known as conservatory. The instrumental music program has existed in its current form since about 1990. Every fourth grader learns to play an instrument, which is chosen from 9 different options. In fifth grade, they can continue this instrument in an ensemble like band and orchestra, or they can join chorus. When they get to middle school, there's several other choices, including guitar, music production. They have a number of options, including instrumental ensembles and choral ensembles. I've been teaching in the program for 18 years. I'm teaching string instruments and orchestra. I've seen firsthand the powerful effect that learning to play an instrument has for these kids. This includes the excitement of seeing a fourth grader hold an instrument for the first time and learning how to take care of it, learning how to hold it correctly. It includes the discipline that it takes for students to learn to practice at home, the teamwork of playing in an ensemble and the social interaction that goes with that, the creativity of improvising or composing one's own music,
the historical context of learning to perform music from other eras and cultures, and the pride of presenting a concert performance for one's friends, families, and teachers in public. I can give you one very timely and comprehensive example. We have a concert coming up on March 12th. This is a concert at Brookline High School. All three of the high school orchestras, whose members were all trained in elementary school, our elementary orchestras are sort of a feeder for the high school ensembles. The three high school orchestras are performing together with the elementary orchestras. That's about 200 students in total. One of the pieces we're performing is an original composition that was written by a young man that first started composing music in my class at Pierce when he was in middle school. And now he's a composition major at Oberlin College. And I think it'll be great for
30
everyone
seconds.
to see all of these people working together. And I invite you to come to the concert. It's going to be great. Music is an important part of society, and therefore learning to play an instrument is a crucial part of any thoughtful, well-rounded curriculum. The benefits for students are irrefutable. We cannot allow this opportunity to be taken from them under any circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the time allotted for public comment at the beginning of the meeting. There will be an opportunity for additional public comment at the end of the meeting.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Sure.
So, just in response, we had a lot of educators speak here. I wanted to say a couple of things. First, thank you for the work that you do. This is a community that values its schools, and the schools are only as good as the people who work in them. So thank you. I know this has been a very tough half decade, really, for educators, not just here, but in Massachusetts more broadly. The pandemic, the various fraying of social bonds, et cetera. So I don't take your decision to come and speak here lightly. I take it very seriously, and I appreciate the work that you do. And I know the select board and everyone in the community does as well. I mean, the board has said, and I think we'll repeat here tonight, everyone's goal here on the school committee, on staff, is to work together and keep our schools strong. And to that end, I want to encourage everyone invested in this, interested in this, unionized staff, non-unionized staff, parents, to work collaboratively to be a part of the solution. I'm glad to see that there's already some positive motion taking place. Last year, when we were in a similar situation with smaller shortfalls, the statewide MTA's focus was on, other priorities. It was on abolishing MCAS, advocating for the right to strike. This year, you go on their website, their first statewide legislative priority is funding for all schools. That's a positive step. And that's an area where we can be in partnership with you, the MTA at the state level, to advocate at the state level for changes that need to happen. But how we got here locally is likely a function of more than one thing. I'm guessing that upcoming analysis that we're going to discuss is going to reveal both the statewide issues that we're aware of and local issues that we're unaware of. And once we have that in hand, that's the roadmap that we're going to need to work collaboratively to solve these problems in the long term. With that said, I don't want to argue this point. I don't want to argue the nuts and bolts of municipal finance this year. So I would really hope that we have a conversation that's on a different level than the one that took place at town meeting last year. Town is hiding revenues. Town is saving too much money because of its bond rating. You're going to hear as part of the presentation that's coming up that our free cash number is well within the state's most recent guidelines. In January, the state updated them. It's between 5 and 7% of last year's net revenues, or the prior year's revenue. Our free cash this year is 5.8%. So we're exactly where the state wants us to be. Our reserves are more than just the liability fund and the catastrophe fund. And we've been told by the people who could make our lives miserable, the bond rating agencies, that we need to be better at that. We need to have reserves across all of our funds at a high enough level to withstand, seismic shocks. I understand where you're saying is that this is a seismic shock. It's a seismic shock that if we keep spending reserves for, we're not going to be able to meet on a year in, year out basis. And then our rating is going to go down and the cost of borrowing money is going to go up. And the cuts that you're going to see as a result of that are going to be much, much worse than anything that's on the table right now. And these, for the record, I think everyone is committed to trying to avoid the cuts that have been proposed that are on the table right now, wherever possible. So that's the work that we're committing to here. And that's the work that I hope you'll work in partnership with us over. And I heard this argument last year. We spend less than other communities on the schools. And again, my response last year is the same. That's not accurate. If you look at where the money comes from and how we spend our money, we have this thing called the town school split that I'm going to explain when we go through the process. It's complex, but the long and the short of it is there are a lot of shared expenses that don't get taken into consideration when we report the per pupil spending to the state. So it looks like, oh yeah, Brookline spends X and these other communities spend Y. In reality, there are things that are spent that are spent on the town side of the budget for the schools or are spent at the shared level, like healthcare costs, that don't always get factored in. So I understand that when you look at it on paper, you say, that doesn't look right, because it's not right. So I don't want us to go into this thinking there's a silver bullet, and the silver bullet is one-time funds. I want us to work collaboratively together to advocate for solutions here. So my hope in these coming months, because it's a process, right? These cuts, the cuts that are proposed are not the cuts that are necessarily going to be made. My hope is to get that number down, to understand where it's coming from and why, so that it doesn't happen again, and to ensure that both on the town side and the school side, there are fiscal controls in place that people can feel confident that when they pay their taxes, that the money is being well spent. So all of that is to say, this is the beginning of a process. I appreciate very much the concerns that you're raising. I want us to work collaboratively and more helpfully to try and address them together. So rather than having the sort of talking past each other, you got the money, no, you don't. You got the money, no, you don't. Let's just drop that and let's work together to get to the solution. So that's my hope as we go through this. I welcome any input from union leadership, from anyone who is interested in having these conversations. Let's make this a collaborative effort and a better process than as opposed to, talking at each other. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our miscellaneous calendar. And the first item is approval of minutes for this for February 5th and February 11th of this year. Any corrections to those minutes? Okay, then I move approval of the minutes for February 5th, 2025 and February 11th, 2025. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, I'd like to vote items 3B through 3U in omnibus fashion, but we have some items that board members would like to have additional discussion and information on. So we will pull out items 3D and 3P for additional discussion before the vote. And are there any other items that board members want to pull out? Okay, seeing none. My reason for pulling out item 3C is that Deputy Superintendent for Operations, Tiffany Oliva, is seeking authorization to hire a new licensing specialist. But before anyone panics, the great Tiffany Souza is leaving her position here in the Select Board's office, but not leaving the town of Brookline. Tiffany will be taking a position with the fire department. I just want to say that we all appreciate the hard and effective work that Tiffany has done for years here in the Select Board's office, and wish her all the best in her new position with the fire department, and hope she comes back to visit us every once in a while. I've already told her that, but I want to let everyone know that that's my feeling at any rate. With respect to item 3, I think it's Q, grant of location with respect to kill sites. Pez, you have some information on that?
Sorry, 3Q is
The agreements we've.
Beacon Street from Killside
restoring
to
the roads.
Oh, yes.
That's Eversource, and we do have a representative from Eversource and also Dan Murphy on the line.
Right. So I wanted to say more broadly, right? There's some significant work that's being done on Eversource, both on Beacon Street and near the golf course, that I just want people to be aware of, that we have reviewed this work. It is vital work. But one of the things that I think the community was concerned about, particularly on Beacon Street, was that street has recently been done and repaved. And once again, we're in a situation where utilities are coming in and needing to do work and opening up the road again. We've received a commitment from Eversource that the repairs that will be done here are not a patch job, that will actually be repairs of the road. We are also committed to making sure that the disruption to these areas is as minimal as possible, and that the maximum notice is provided to residents so that these don't come out of nowhere and are moved along as quickly and efficiently as possible. So if members of the board have questions or concerns, but I do just want to note that as part of the discussion with Eversource, we made clear that what needs to happen here is the road needs to be put back in the same shape that it was or better. And that in the future, there needs to be stronger collaboration between DPW and Eversource. The responses that we got, I think, were actually heartening. The team at DPW and Eversource both said that the collaboration between the two in terms of the shared calendar is much stronger than it was before. And these events should hopefully be a much more limited thing to the extent that they occur at all. So.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion? David?
You initially mentioned 3D, but
Oh, did I?
3C.
Sorry.
I do have a question about 3D.
Okay.
So that's for the librarian 2 position. So I noticed that is for the Putterham Library, but then the job description is about the Coolidge Corner Library. Now, my assumption is that's because this is to create a similar position, and so the job description of Coolidge Corner is the most accurate fit for that. Is that why that's in there?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the discrepancy there, but yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I'd like to move approval in omnibus fashion of items 3B through 3U. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, let's move on to our main calendar. And first item, let me see what it's called. Question of approving the town administrator's recommendation for the director of the Council on Aging. I'd like to just start off by saying, I assume the select board is wise enough to approve the town administrator's recommendation of Emily Williams to be the director of the Council on Aging. John is the select board's liaison to the Council on Aging and can better tell us about the role that the director plays. But from my standpoint, Emily Williams is an excellent person to take the reins after the 40 years that Ruth Ann Dobeck has been at the helm. We were a little concerned, a lot of people were a little concerned about our ability to find someone who could possibly fill Ruth Ann's huge shoes. Well, maybe that's a wrong metaphor to use, to take the place of Ruth Ann Dobeck at the helm. She has been such a hardworking, effective, and beloved director of the Council on Aging. So it's gonna be hard for anyone to replace her. But I think that Emily Williams can fill those shoes and become as effective as Ruth Ann Dobeck. Maybe not immediately, but very quickly over the next period of time. I'm particularly interested in the perspective she can bring to the position with her background in gerontology, which studies and addresses the many and diverse problems, not, the obvious ones, of aging, and is committed to improving the lives of people as they age by addressing, the biological, the psychological, the sociological, the economic, the political, and other factors that can impede people's lives or impede improvements in people's lives. So I'm pretty excited about, what we have, what we can look forward to in the future at the Council on Aging. And of course, we all thank Ruth Ann Dobeck for the incredible job that she has done all these years. So, any other thoughts? I'm sorry about
Well, no, that's
pointing out
okay.
you're a liaison, but
No, you mentioned that, and I appreciate that. But you said it so well. I don't have all that much to add. The meeting where Emily was approved was a very, very satisfactory meeting because I had the feeling that that the sentiment was shared universally in the room and among the people participating remotely. We found the right person, and to be the right person to succeed Ruth Ann Dobeck is saying a lot. Ruth Ann is an innovator. She was an advocate, but she's still helping us through this period. And she is an excellent manager, team leader, seeker out and cultivator of talent. She has served the town so ably for so many years. that it's just reassuring to know that there are people like Emily who can come along and step up to the challenge of being Ruth Ann's successor. But looking forward to working with Emily and looking forward to hearing from Ruth Ann on her next adventure.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I do want to say one thing. So I agree with all the sentiments, and I'm excited that we're filling the position. But just to speak to how much knowledge exists with Ruth Ann and the important factor that we have a transition plan with her. She's being retained. I don't know how for how long. I hope it's flexible because I'll tell you a quick story. So last night we held our first CDBG community development block grant committee meeting where we allocate the funds and we listen to various presentations. And Ruth Ann was there representing the Council on Aging, the TRIPS program. And the TRIPS program, which provides transportation for aging adults and all kinds, it's a very complex program, but it's very important. And it's growing. I think there's now 12,000. They're doing 12,000 rides a month. I forget how many there are, but there's a lot. But Ruth Ann's ability to rattle off all the funding sources, how it's cobbled together, the timing of those sources, when you need to ask, how they overlap, which ones are ending, which ones have to be augmented, that comes from decades of doing it. I want to thank her for her knowledge in this area. And I do hope that as the transition continues, that Ruth Ann, if she is available to assist from time to time to transfer knowledge, I think that's really an important aspect of our next director's success, because there's a lot of knowledge there on how funding is identified, the relationships that exist that get funding, and how to put it all together. It's not easily learned over a long period of time.
Thank you.
So Emily is with us online. I want to give her the opportunity to introduce herself. You can see my memo in the packet, so I don't want to just repeat it. But again, to everyone's point, we're very fortunate to have Emily as the finalist candidate. Her nomination was approved unanimously by all present members of the Council on Aging last week. She currently serves as the executive director of the Town of Bridgewater's Department of Elder Affairs. She has a 20-year career in this field. She holds a Master of Science in Gerontology from UMass Boston, Bachelor of Science in Health Administration from the University of North Florida. You can see her resume in the packet as well. Really just grateful for and excited to welcome her aboard with your approval. I do want to thank briefly, in addition to Ruth Ann, obviously, as all the select board members have said, the hiring panel that provided me with advice and guidance as I reached this decision to submit a candidate to the select board. That panel was comprised of Dick Benka, who's a member of the Brookline Committee on Town Organization and Structure and a former member of the select board. Susan Granoff, who's chair of the advisory committee, subcommittee that handles the budget for the Council on Aging. Bernard Green, chair of the select board. Patricia Mayer, who's a nurse practitioner and co-president of Brookline Friends of Public Health. Betsy Pollock, who's a social worker and is president of the Senior Center Board of Directors, as well as a member of the Senior Center Foundation. Yolanda Rodriguez, who's chair of the Council on Aging, and Ruth Seidman, who's the co-chair of Brookline CAN. It's a lot of work for those folks to go through many different resumes, make recommendations, knowing that the process is advisory, knowing that it's on a volunteer basis. I'm really grateful for their work on this. So thank you. And thank you to Emily. I want to give her a chance to unmute. Sorry that we continue to go on here. And just say hello to the board and introduce yourself if you're willing.
I have a slight delay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm apparently having audio problems. I just have a new laptop, and it's not normal for me to have technology issues because it's something I'm very well versed in. I just wanted to thank Chaz and every single individual who interviewed me and gave me direction, and Ruth Ann for providing guidance over the past month plus. I've been a colleague of hers for many, many years and learned a lot. And I hope to be a fantastic successor to her and continue to bring Brookline older adults, caregivers, and the field of social work in particular, a great future in the town. So thank you.
Thank you. So, unless you have anything else to say, I move approval of the town administrator's recommendation to appoint Emily Williams to be the new director of the Council on Aging. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Mike Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
David Perlman,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you, and welcome aboard, Emily.
Congratulations.
Welcome aboard, Emily. Thank you. Congrats.
Okay, next, boards and commissions appointments. Let's see, we have two appointments, one to the Transportation Board and the other to, what's the other one?
Cliff Brown to the.
I'm sorry.
Expenditures of Revenue.
Okay,
Expenditures of Revenue.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to start off by saying, with respect to the Transportation Board, we have three candidates for one opening. And I am going to go around the table and ask each select board member who they want to select, who they want to appoint, and we'll see what the outcome is. But first, some thoughts I have about boards and commissions generally. And I propose that we communicate these ideas to all applicants before their interviews. But I want to just make some points right now along those lines. In voting, you should consider the mission of the board or commission that we are interviewing candidates for. Transportation Board was established by state legislation and is responsible for the administration of all matters related to parking and transportation within the town. This includes its special role in connection with the Washington Street project. That project illustrates the importance of Transportation Board members having, as among their most important qualifications, the ability and willingness to work closely with other members of the Transportation Board to address very complex problems. They must also be committed to complying with the Select Board's commissions, procedures that we adopted in October of 2023. Among other things, that procedure requires that individual members of boards and commissions be careful not to reach out to staff in their individual capacity as a member of a board or commission, but work with the chair on any issues that involve staff interaction. And of course, we ask all people, not just boards and commission members, but everyone interacting with staff, administration, or each other, to act in accordance with the code of conduct for employees and boards and commissions. I don't expect this to be an issue with respect to the Transportation Board, but I want to start the process of making those points before we interview people for boards, just so we're absolutely clear what we're expecting of not just the boards, but also the individual members. At the same time, members must be willing to listen to the many, and in Brookline we have many special interest groups trying to impose their positions on the decisions of a board or commission, while not being pushed into making decisions based solely on the decibel level of the proponents. In other words, listen, but listen critically and carefully from the standpoint of the mission of the board or commission that you're on. So before we vote, do any other members have any comments or thoughts or criticisms of what I said?
No.
Yeah,
nothing
actually,
here.
I
Michael.
think that was all very appropriate. I think it's important to emphasize that I think on virtually every board and commission, certainly on the Transportation Board, we have the advantage of having some very good staff members. And while boards and commissions are free to listen to a recommendation and decide to go in a different direction, it's really important that they listen respectfully and have a forthright discussion back and forth with staff members, so that the staff members have a chance to make their point and can feel like they're heard. And I think in my experience as former chair of the Transportation Board, was that most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we followed staff recommendations. And when we didn't, we had a healthy discussion with the staff as to why we're going in a different direction. So working with staff is a really important part of any of these jobs, and particularly this one.
Okay, so what we're going to do is just go around the board and take a poll of who you'd like to appoint to the Transportation Board. Anyone have a problem with that? Seems simple as it can be.
Sure.
Okay, that means that John, you're first.
Love it. My choice for this position is Richard Murphy, and I say that while also indicating as strongly as I possibly can that the three people who applied for this were extraordinarily qualified, and I hope maybe, if not this time around, we'll see, we might see them again. So Richard Murphy.
Okay, Mike?
Gareth Lawson.
Paul?
Richard Murphy.
David?
Richard Murphy.
Not because I see which way the wind's blowing, but I vote Richard Murphy also. Okay, so and I see that Richard's in the room here, so congratulations. Yes, Paul.
I should have taken the opportunity when you were talking about boards and commissions and just the general nature of the work and to collaborate. And I want to follow on Mike's comment about working with staff. I think it's so imperative that boards and commissions see themselves in partnership with staff. Because much of the work that they do, depending on the board and commission, they need the support of staff and the board in order to accomplish what they want to accomplish. Now, sometimes there's decisions that are in the moment and you're making a very specific decision, but sometimes you're looking at longer term planning that could affect bylaws, or it could affect the CIP, it could affect funding. And these things are best done in consultation and collaboration with staff. I think it's the proper way to do it. In my work with a couple of different boards, participating peripherally and directly, I can see sometimes that there's nothing wrong with a healthy debate or tension, let's call it creative tension, but ultimately we need boards and commissions to collaborate with staff for good outcomes for the town. So I'm hoping that that will continue as we go forward.
Okay, we voted, right?
On that one?
Well, I think we informally voted. We went around with a straw poll, but
Yeah, if you want to make it official. you can
Okay.
go ahead.
Right.
So I move approval of Richard Murphy as appointee to the Transportation Board. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van
Aye.
Scoyac, Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
David Perlman,
aye.
chair votes aye. Okay. We've already congratulated you, so we don't have to do that.
You have Cliff.
Yep.
And what about
Next,
our-
pardon?
What about there was another name that came up?
So we didn't get that in time, unfortunately, to put it on
Okay.
the agenda, but we will have it on the 5th. There will be a final member of the committee,
Okay.
the study,
Sorry.
expenditures.
Didn't mean to
Revenues.
interrupt
Yeah,
you.
no, that's right.
We can announce it, right?
If you, yeah, your recommendation, you can,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't vote on it.
Okay. Okay, next, question of appointing Cliff Brown to the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee as the advisory committee alternate member, replacing the seat currently held by Dennis Doughty.
Who's the primary member of the, so if he's the alternate, who's the primary for?
He's there.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Doggett, thank you.
Mr. Doggett. So all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
David Perlman,
Aye.
chair votes aye. And I want to also announce that as the charge indicates, it's John Van Scoyac and I who will select or are selecting the members of the Expenditure and Revenue Committee. And we got 3 applications for the final position that's on the committee. And we decided to choose a woman by the name of Sadaf Kamsi, who is quite an accomplished resident who has been involved in town affairs at a very local level and is willing to step forward for this more town-wide responsibility. She is a engineer. She is a lawyer. She has an MBA and a lot of business experience, which I won't go into great detail on because I don't remember all of it. So we've selected her and we'll officially appoint her at the next meeting. I did ask her to Zoom in for this meeting, and I don't know that she has, but she may be participating this evening. So, okay. Any questions on that?
All this is subject to the vote. of the
Yeah.
board.
Right, which
Yeah.
at your next meeting, that will be on the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, next, ground floor, I have that right. Commercial incentive. This is a public hearing, question of ratifying the ground floor commercial incentive standards and guidelines for mixed-use districts outside of Harvard Street. So I see approaching the board is
Sandy, so.
Sandy Silk on behalf of the Economic Development Advisory Board. Just really here to answer any questions you might have. We don't really have a formal presentation tonight, but I just wanted to make you aware that I was available, and Maria Morelli, I believe, might be online.
Yeah, we had a thorough discussion of this earlier. I'm sure people remember that discussion. Any questions that board members have?
None here for me.
Okay, well.
It is a
okay.
public hearing.
Yeah.
I know you know. I know it's your job.
Just wanted to wait to see if anyone on the select board. This is a public hearing. Let's open up the public hearing. Tiffany,
Yes, there was no one who signed up in advance of the meeting. If there's anyone in the room who wishes to speak on this item, please make your presence known. And if there's anyone online, please raise your hand using the raise the hand feature at this time. There are 8 participants in the room and 30 online, and no one is indicating their desire to speak on this item.
okay, we'll close the hearing and proceed to a vote. I move approval of the ground floor commercial incentive standards and guidelines for mixed-use districts outside of Harvard Street that we previously discussed. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Okay. Now, the main event, right?
Mr. Chair, this item is slated for 7 o'clock, and we've noticed that for all 3
Oh,
meetings.
okay,
So
let's take a break.
Oh, my God.
Can you believe we're ahead of schedule?
That will not persist.
No.
Wait, is there anything that we can take up?
Out of order?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Well,
The
well,
reappointments.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do those, boards and commission reappointments. Question of reappointing the following individuals to various boards and commissions. Brookline Commission for Women, Elizabeth Z. Stillman as chair, and Prashanti Krishna as a member. Any questions or anything?
Oh, that's good.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Next, Community Preservation Act Committee, Susan C. Cohen, representing or being appointed because of her position on the Brookline Housing Authority. All in favor? Any questions or anything? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac.
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, so why don't we take a
Can we do 9?
Right, can we do the
9?
MWRA?
Lincoln available? Let's double check.
Okay,
Lincoln is not online yet, and I'm wondering if we can accomplish that in 10 to 15 minutes.
yeah, there may be some discussion. Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
let's take a break.
Okay. We'll break for 10 minutes, be back a couple minutes before 7 and gear up for our hearing.
Excellent.
2, 1.
The Advisory Committee's primary function is to review and make recommendations on the budget and present the annual appropriation warrant article with the proposed operating and capital budgets for the coming fiscal year to town meeting. Our role as a select board under the bylaw 3.1.2 is to exercise general supervision over all matters affecting the general and financial interests and welfare of the town. So we have a more general role than the advisory committee, but still important, so don't think otherwise. Thus, the select board, like the advisory committee, will hold hearings on the financial plan to understand and to make sure that, in our case, our goals and objectives are generally reflected in that plan. The presentation of the financial plan is one moment in the process of developing the fiscal year 2026 budget. That process began with the development of the select board's goals and objectives at our June 18 workshop. Those goals and objectives were further developed over the summer and at our fall workshop on September 17. And those goals and objectives were then available to town departments to use as they prepared their budget request to the town administrator. At our December 10 workshop, we received a presentation by Deputy Town Administrator Melissa Goff and Finance Director Lincoln Heineman on the financial forecast. Based on the Select Board's goals and objectives, the budget requests of town departments, and the long-range financial forecast, the town administrator prepared the financial plan, which some of you have in front of you, this big, thick document, which I'm sure everyone has already read. And the select board and the advisory committee are beginning our reviews. And this joint meeting is sort of the beginning of that process. We've asked members of our newly formed Expenditure and Revenue Committee to attend to get a head start on their deliberations. Let's see, Mr. Doggett, as representing the advisory committee, do you want to add anything or make any comment?
Oh, sorry, we have a microphone here today this year, so we will pass that around so folks can
just say thank you and good evening.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So with that, tell us what's in this book.
Sorry, Mr. Carey, before we begin, for folks participating online, you have been promoted, but I ask that you please not touch any of the settings on the meeting unless to unmute or share your video when it's appropriate for questions, just for a seamless meeting here.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chaz Carey. I'm the town administrator here in Brookline. Thank you to the select board, the chair and all its members. Thank you to the advisory committee, its leadership and all the members here, and the newly formed Expenditures and Revenues Study Committee for the work we're all about to embark on together, both on this year's budget and in the coming months to address some of the more structural questions that arise both out of this budget and issues surrounding it. So this is an opportunity for us to present to you, but also to the community more broadly, what our initial snapshot of fiscal year 26 is going to look like. Fiscal year 26 begins on July 1st of 2025 and ends on June 30th of 2026. This plan encompasses all of the town's projected revenues and expenditures, including those that come out of enterprise funds, which we will discuss in a little bit. But just by virtue of the fact that this is a town-focused presentation, and because the school committee is a separate entity, We do not get into much detail in this presentation about what the line items for the school committee are, what the obligations there are. Under Massachusetts law, the school committee is a separately elected body. They appoint a superintendent to oversee day-to-day operations. The only role that town meeting, who sets the fiscal budget, has in the operations of the school department is to set the top line number. What is the total amount of revenue that is appropriated to the school committee? And we cannot place conditions on that appropriation. So discussion about what the money, how the money is spent on the school side of the ledger is with certain exceptions that are shared expenses or expenses that the town bears on the school's behalf, not the subject of this presentation. We will, however, discuss those shared expenses and the revenue split more generally, how the town allocates the money that it brings in between the town, between the schools and all other town departments. Before I delve into this, I want to give some thanks to the team that you see on the slide here: Melissa Goff, Deputy Town Administrator, Charlie Young, our Assistant Town Administrator for Finance, Tyler Belisle, our Budget Analyst and Grant Administrator, and Nicole Lima, our Assistant Grant Administrator, all of whom worked many late nights getting this together and continue to work now as this process begins. This is really the end of the beginning for the budget process. And now we move into the middle phase, which is the hearings, the discussions, the hashing out of the appropriation details before presenting it to town meeting in May. So I want to thank all of them for the hard work there. I also want to thank Lincoln Heineman, our finance director, and the whole team at the finance department. This has been a really arduous time more generally in local government. And the whole finance team has really moved heaven and earth to make this town run smoothly. So much of what you don't see is because the finance department is doing a good job keeping the wheels spinning. So I really want to thank them for keeping all the many plates in the air. It is critical. And if they're doing their jobs well, unfortunately, the reward for that is you don't see what they're doing. So I just want to thank the entire finance department for all their hard work on that. So here's the budget overview. We are now in year 3 of a proposed 3-year override cycle. You may recall that the town passed an operating override of almost $12 million in 2023, May of 2023. That allocated roughly 60-40 between the schools and the town to cover certain operating expenses. Since then, budgetary pressure remains. Our expenses continue to grow at a higher level than our revenues. The drivers of that on the town side remain inflation. It is decreasing, but it is not reversing. Our utility costs are also thankfully decreasing in some areas, but increasing in others. We are at the end of our sanitation contract's life cycle, a 5-year sanitation contract that had to negotiate a new one. That contract did move several services that had been handled in-house over to contracted services, which is expensive. When we did the numbers, it was roughly equivalent to do that versus maintain services in-house. But we ultimately recommended to the select board, based on some of the factors, including staffing concerns, that at the end of the day, moving those services over to the contracted side of operations was necessary, and the select board approved that contract. Collective bargaining remains a pressure on the town side. We currently have one major settled contract with the police department. That obviously is good to have a settled contract. It does create pressures on the budget. That contract was large. It was for a 4-year cycle, for a 4-year plan, puts the police on cycle with everyone else, all the other unions in town. And the benefit that the town received from it in being able to exit civil service was significant. We are continuing to recruit lateral members at a very high rate, which is exciting and good news. But it is expensive to fund that contract. It is also expensive to fund that contract when overtime continues to be an issue across the public safety departments. I think there are different reasons for that in police and fire, but the hope of this contract was that in reaching near full employment, we would see overtime numbers go down. We have not yet seen that happen, and that is a pressure on the budget. So between collective bargaining that has not yet been settled and will have retroactive or ongoing impact, particularly in the cases of our negotiations with AFSCME, who represent a number of different working groups, labor groups in the town operations, and the firefighters union. Those remain potential budgetary pressures above and beyond our revenue capacity to deal with. The allocation between the town and schools is set by something called the Town School Partnership. That has existed since the mid-90s, was really decided upon in the long aftermath of Proposition 2.5, which in Massachusetts capped the amount of growth from property taxes that a municipality could impose absent going to the voters for an override. In the mid-90s, the town and schools, because of the fight over resources, came to an agreement in which they would say, we will take certain expenses together. We will share certain expenses. We will pay for certain expenses in a manner that's called above the line. That is to say, when the revenue comes in, we spend it on those joint expenses. And then all remaining revenue is allocated according to a set formula. Initially, that formula was 50-50. Nowadays, it is just below 60-40. And with some of the override funding, depending on the year, it occasionally goes above 60. So we say that it's approximately a 60-40 split. The schools receive 60% of all remaining revenue, and all of the departments receive 40% of that remaining revenue. The FY26 financial plan continues that split process, including allocating the override funds that were designated to those various departments appropriately. With that said, the school department presented a budget, an initial budget picture a couple of weeks back that projected a shortfall of $8.2 million. I want to emphasize that that number is not a level funded budget, right? That is a number that includes expansion requests, items that were, programming or recommended for continuation or expansion, priorities of the school board, the school committee, and so forth. So it is a fully loaded number. That is to say, if everything that was asked for was agreed to, that would be how much their increase would be. And so I've seen some people ask, where did the money go? The money didn't necessarily go anywhere. It is a projection of costs for next year that outstrips the amount of revenue that is available for it. So I expect that number will go down because the school committee will need to make choices about what potential expansion requests or additional things that they might want to fund in an ideal situation that they don't want to fund in this situation. Again, the town wants to be collaborative and work with them, provide guidance wherever they seek it. It is the decision of the school committee to determine how to bring their budget into alignment with the revenue that we have available. On the town side, the shortfall is currently projected to be smaller. It's $560,000, $560,000. That, on the other hand, is expected to increase. Again, we are looking at the overtime numbers not coming down, even though staffing has increased. We are looking at the potential costs of any collective bargaining agreements that we enter into that are over and above what was budgeted for the cost of living adjustments for these years. And we also have to be mindful that at the end of the day, we must balance our budgets. It's not just that the school department is projecting this $8.2 million shortfall from their fully loaded budget. It's that they currently are experiencing projected shortfall in FY25. And if they are unable to close that, we will need to find a way to close it for them, because the other alternative is, well, there is no other alternative. We must balance our budget. With certain exceptions that are really not relevant here, municipalities in Massachusetts cannot deficit spend. So we cannot miss in the wrong direction. When people talk about projecting revenues in a more aggressive manner, the state actually says in its guidance, you should project your revenues as conservatively as you possibly can, because you cannot afford to be wrong. And if you are wrong, the state will not be there to save you. The state will punish you. So we need to be cognizant of that when we build out our revenue projections. They are based on the wherever possible, what it is that we think we can reasonably say within a conservative framework. But even within that conservative framework this year, we have pushed the envelope as best we can to bring revenues to the point where we can provide what relief we can on both the town and the school side. So To do that, some of the things that we've done on the town side are going to require, longer term discussions, longer term reckonings. For example, the American Rescue Plan Act, which provided the town with $44 million, a little over 10 of which came from the county. The rest was allocated directly to the town during the pandemic. All of that was required to be obligated to specific goals and objectives by the end of last calendar year. It has been. We were very grateful to Tyler and Nicole, again, who were our ARPA leaders on this. Over 100 projects, including many community projects, large and small, were funded by ARPA. Our ARPA model was viewed as exemplary by other communities, and the fact that it really did require and thrive on community participation. It funded temporary school shortfalls. It also funded things like public art. It funded things like the Welcome to Brookline program at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Inclusion and Community Relations, which is designed to make it easier for people of all backgrounds to move and get their footing under them in Brookline. So projects large and small were funded through ARPA, and it was really a boon to the community, but it was a one-time boon. And now we are facing the potential of a cliff. On the town side, we have been very mindful of this cliff. We have not, wherever possible, put recurring expenses into ARPA lines. This year, in order to bridge the gap for some of these shortfalls, we have funded items that we otherwise would have funded this year through the operating budget through ARPA. Those are discrete recurring capital expenditures. And you'll see in the cuts list that what those are is things like vehicles that have a regular replacement schedule. So they're not a one-time expenditure, they're a recurring capital expenditure. This year, we are funding them with one-time funds. The obvious concern there is that if that money is not there next year, we're not going to be able to fund that, and we will not be able to maintain that replacement schedule. Some of the moves off of ARPA were deferred. Their movement off of the community development block grant was deferred. And so all of these items may ultimately wind up being future cuts if we are unable to make the budget balance as necessary in FY27. But given the broader discussion that the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee is going to have about the structural deficit and what potentially may be on the ballot for FY27, whether that's another override or not, we wanted to be able to bridge that this year and have that discussion as part of the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee's efforts. So that is where we are with that money. I will say there is a uncertainty over federal funding that is serious for both town and schools. I will say that on the town side, it is less existential than on the school side. We were very proactive in this regard. We are one of the only municipalities I'm aware of to take seriously the possibility that this administration would win the election in November. And we prepared for that eventuality. We came up with lists of funding sources that might be impacted. We analyzed those. We figured out where the risks were, what they would be tied to, what asks would be made of us, and where we would be asked to compromise the community's principles, and what we would then be able to say in saying, we're not going to compromise the community's principles if you're holding this money over us. Exposure on the federal fund side for the town is roughly $3 million. A large portion of that comes from the community development block grant. That's also the primary source of funding for staff in the planning, for a staff line in the planning department that would potentially be impacted in the event that all federal funding was cut off to us. As of right now, we have not been cut off from community development block grant funds, and we have received no indication that we will be. However, anything is possible. So we are taking that threat very seriously. In all other instances, what we're looking at is what can we do without? So some of the things that this money funds, we will simply try and do without or manage accordingly. It's not going to be easy. It is a lot of money, but our priority is preserving operations and preserving staff. So fortunately, not many of our lines would be impacted by a federal funding cut, but certainly our projects, our goals, our grant money, our long-term objectives that are funded through federal partnerships are at risk. And I don't want to minimize that. $3 million is not a small number. So the total budget balance is $456.6 million, revenues and expenses all in. And it represents a 4.4% increase over the prior fiscal year. Again, we talked about the town school revenue split. Municipal department budgets continue to prioritize employee retention. Where the cuts have been made in that $560,000, as we discussed, is to certain discretionary budget items. I will say, and it's worth repeating, that over 80% of our costs on both the town and the school side are for wages and benefits. So when people talk about cutting discretionary spending, you are already talking about less than 15% of the budget in most cases on both the town and the school side. So we have already undertaken cuts last year in order to fund the police contract. We are cutting again this year. We have pulled what levers we can pull this year in order to ensure that we balance the budget. But we are coming up against that line where it is possible that the next steps may be more drastic. Those could include things like a hiring freeze. It could include reduction in positions. It could include reduction in staffing. So I just want that to be clear, that although we are able to balance where we are now, those items that I talked about that are looming and likely to roost at some point during this fiscal year will have an impact on that number and potentially may require more drastic intervention. Our capital budgets represent 10.3% of the prior year's net revenue. And when you include excluded debt, let me say for the folks following along, excluded debt is money that the voters take on voluntarily. When you vote for a particular capital project, for example, the Pierce School or the firehouse renovations, that is what's called excluded debt because that comes directly into people's tax bills. So that doesn't, because we're able to draw that from additional revenue, we don't carry that as part of the ordinary capital budget. But when you include excluded debt, the total amount of money as part of the total percentage of the budget that is capital related is 18.8%. That's quite high. We have a lot of capital projects going on right now. The community has invested in capital projects, and that's important. But the capacity for additional capital projects is limited. Our enterprise funds are up by 3.2%, and our reserves and long-term liability funding are set to meet their goals this year. We talked about this during the select board's, when the select board revised its fiscal policies. One of the things that we were told by the credit rating agencies, the bond rating agencies, when we went out to have these conversations was that initially across all reserve funds, so not just the catastrophic fund, the liability fund, et cetera, they like to see municipalities at around 10% of the last year's revenues. This time around, what they said was, we'd like it to be 20%, and ideally it should be higher than that still. They pointed to us on a list of all the other AAA bond-rated communities in Massachusetts, and we were toward the bottom. So the select board decided to adopt a policy that targets us to get at the median of Massachusetts communities. Given our weaknesses, potential weaknesses elsewhere in terms of this, what keeps us in the AAA bond rating world now is our solid fiscal policies and our ability to follow them. In many other ways, when they look at us on the Moody's scorecard, we're not a AAA rated community. So it's very important that we have strong fiscal policies and that we follow them. What happens if we lose our AAA bond rating? The cost of borrowing money goes up. Why is that a problem? Because that's one of those above the line costs for unexcluded debt. If we are borrowing to complete certain projects, it will cost more money to do so. And that means that there will be less money to go into the operating budgets for both the town and the schools, and there will be more drastic cuts. It is, in recent memory, I think Acton in 21 lost their AAA rating. Other communities have lost AAA ratings. It is not impossible. In fact, it happens, and we need to be very cautious about it because the consequences to the operating budgets for both the town and the schools, if we lose that rating, is quite significant. We are targeting to have our pensions fully funded by 2030. This is a valuable and aggressive timeline. Right now, we are on track to do so. I'll talk a little bit more about where we are in terms of assumptions of investment growth. One of the things that members of the community have asked about how we can find additional revenue is, can we push that schedule out? That schedule is the provenance of the retirement board. So no, we can't do it unilaterally. I don't think the retirement board would do it, given how close we are, the uncertainty of the picture going forward, and the fact that it would be the benefit to us should we get to that point is so high. I doubt the retirement board would be inclined to move in that direction, nor necessarily would I recommend it, given where we are in this. One caution here, and I will say, is that behind pension funding is our other post-employment benefits, healthcare, and so forth. And whereas with our pension funding, we are very close to the finish line. With our other post-employment benefits, we are still hovering in the 30% range. We have a longer way to go to fulfill those obligations. It costs us money to do so while they're not fully funded. So much of the funding that goes now to satisfying the pension obligations will shift there. So I don't want people to think that this is a sprint to 2030 and then there's money available. That's not the case. Here are some numbers. You can see where our revenues are coming from. You can see, again, the lion's share of our revenues is property tax. The increase there is 6.3%. Local receipts are up by 5.6%, but you can see what a small portion of the overall budget local receipts are. State aid up by less than $1 million. Free cash, appropriated free cash has decreased to an approximate 20.8 million. Other available funds has decreased significantly for reasons we'll discuss. And then the enterprise revenues have increased somewhat. But again, enterprises are revolving. They go in, they come out, they need to be net. So they operate in their own world. You look at expenditures. Here are the municipal departments. The school department's revenue allocation is $141 million, an increase in 3.6%. The non-departmental appropriations is up 8%. That is that above the line money. That is the stuff like healthcare and other things that we often refer to as budget busters. A reason why the revenues allocated to the municipal departments and school departments are not where those entities would want them to be is because that money is going into the non-departmental buckets first. And the biggest driver of that is healthcare. We experienced an 8% increase in healthcare costs 2 years ago, a 10% increase last year. This year, it's 12%. We are hoping that that number is wrong. We're going to get a report on that in the first week of March. But we don't think it's wrong. Just based on what we're seeing from other communities, it's unlikely that that number will decrease significantly. If it does, obviously it's good. And wherever possible, we will use that to defray expenses. But it's unlikely. So I don't think we can look necessarily to healthcare savings, projecting healthcare savings in order to get us to a better place on this. So again, property taxes make up 72.7% of our revenues. Local receipts, only 7.6%. State aid, 5.6%. Free cash, 4.6%. And the net enterprises, 8.5%, with other available funds bringing up the rear at 1%. Property taxes growth is restricted by Prop 2.5, as we discussed. So that's 2.5% annually, plus the new growth formula that's calculated in the assessor's office. Anything beyond that is through a voter override or an exclusion. So there's an increase here. It's a positive increase. It's at 6.3%, 19.5 million. But you can also see the growth in debt servicing costs is quite significant. It's $29 million. Right now, of the property tax dollars, the total, a significant amount of that goes to our debt servicing, our excluded debt service. So that's money we don't have available to us because it's going to specific projects. And once those projects are complete, that money comes out of the tax levy. So it's not available for other purposes. State aid is only up by less than $500,000. This is from the governor's budget. The governor's budget was released in February. That is the kickoff for us to begin publishing the financial plan. What ultimately happens at the statewide level is that the budget goes through both houses of the legislature, it goes through the House, then the Senate, and then ultimately it winds up on the governor's desk as part of the conference process. And what typically happens during that process is this number goes up, but it doesn't go up very much. And again, all of this money goes through the town school split. So unrestricted general government aid and Chapter 70 funding, unrestricted general government aid intended for general coffers, Chapter 70 for schools, that is all split along the 60-40 split. So a raise in Chapter 70 doesn't necessarily mean a raise for schools only, in the same way that a raise in unrestricted general government aid, known by the endearing acronym UGA, does not go entirely to the town. So you can see here what happened in the governor's budget. We're looking at we are what's called a minimum aid community. I made reference earlier tonight to the issues at the statewide level with funding education. There are multiple indicators that the funding formula that the state put in place as part of the Student Opportunity Act is insufficient to meet the growth costs. And as a result, even when the governor and the legislature boost this amount per pupil, it's not enough. It doesn't cover the increases in costs that it's meant to cover. And while the legislature is convening I believe, a working group to discuss how to solve this problem, excuse me, I don't think we're going to get there by the time town meeting has to pass a budget. I don't think we're going to even get there by the fall necessarily. It is a thorny problem. And there are, as much as it impacts our community as a minimum aid community, there are smaller regional school departments that are facing truly existential threats this year, threats to their basic operations. And so I want to reemphasize what I've said during the course of this, which is I do think some of the issues the school department is facing are statewide issues, and they're going to require statewide solutions. Local receipts are up. $1.8 million. Projected local receipts are up 5.6%. Again, this is less than 10% of the overall budget. Where we're seeing the biggest area for growth is in some of the local option taxes. So lodging and meals, we think will go up significantly. The revenue from those will go up significantly. However, some of that increase is the refuse fee. We increased the fee for trash collection to meet the needs of the contract. Which means that that money is already spoken for. That money is all going to fund the new sanitation contract. In the meantime, major sources of past surpluses are declining, in particular building permit revenue. Year over year, that number is getting smaller. In the past, building revenue has been a real cash cow in local receipts, but that's no longer true. Big projects are not starting or they're stopping. And so we're not seeing the kind of revenue that we used to see there. I encouraged us in discussions with the building department to be as aggressive as possible here. We have been, but the danger in the other danger with building permit revenue is that it's volatile. It depends in a community like this, where there are not a lot of small projects that get done, but then there are these big monster projects that then contribute. It's lumpy, it's volatile. So we can't lean too heavily on that in the hopes that one big project will come through and push us over the line. That's putting it on black in the casino, and we don't want to do that. The other big driver of what's been beating our expectations is investment income. I'm sure you have all seen the irrational exuberance of the stock market. We have too. We are not allowed to invest aggressively, which is good. We don't. There's a very hard limit in what we can and can't invest in. But one, the market has been good. And two, we've had more cash lying around. We had that ARPA money. And when we weren't spending it, we put it in the bank. And that allowed us to generate significant investment returns. We're spent some of that money and we will spend the rest of it in the next 2 years. So we will have less money in the bank to generate investment income. And we don't know what the investment income picture is going to look like in the next couple of years. I don't think it would be wise for us to, wherever possible, we've raised this number, right? It's not like we've stood pat on this. We've done our best to look at the past results, tried to think out where we are on this, but we can't just assume that everything is bright. We have to think realistically about the risks there in increasing the projected interest income. So total free cash is estimated at $23.5 million. We don't appropriate all the free cash per best practices. We have to set some of that aside as unappropriated money. That forms the kernel of any potential free cash for next year. That's where we start with our free cash for the following fiscal year. Again, that is a best fiscal practice for all Massachusetts communities, and it's one that we follow. The new Massachusetts DLS target for free cash as of January 2025 is between 5 and 7% of your prior year's revenue. It's originally said, I think 5.8. It's less than that. It's 5.3. It's 5.3% of FY25 revenues. So we are right where we need to be in terms of where free cash is. So again, 20.8 million of that will be used in the FY26 budget to meet the town's capital plan and various operating reserves. And that remaining balance is left unappropriated. So of that 20.8 million, almost $15 million, 14.66 will be going to fund the capital improvement program. $3.5 million will go into the stabilization fund. And then from there, you have operating reserves and the Affordable Housing Trust. I will say that in the event that we must balance the school budget on from this fiscal year, one or more of those items may be at risk. We may draw that money into the school budget if we need to balance the budget there. But again, it's my hope that we don't have to do that and that we can work collaboratively with the school department to identify alternative sources of meeting the shortfall for FY25. Other available funds. These come from various sources, reimbursements from enterprise for general fund related costs. We used to have host community agreement funding. We no longer have that. Cannabis retailers no longer pay us a host community agreement fee, community impact fee. And so that's no longer a source of realistic revenue for us. We do receive money as part of the global opioid settlement. That is an important source of revenue. That money, as we will discuss, is going this year to funding increased our more robust social services model, given how strong a community priority that is. Last year, we had money coming out of the overlay surplus. The overlay is money that's set aside in the event that we have to settle tax bills with folks, in the event that we overcharge them for something, and they successfully challenge it. Last year, we had a major settlement with a bunch of utilities. The utilities agreed that we had taxed them in the right amount, and so that the money that we had put aside in the event that we were wrong, we were able to spend. We don't have that anymore. It's not in the overlay. So we have no money to release from the overlay this year, and that's why other available funds has gone down so much this year. Let's talk about expenditures. Again, you can see that non-departmental number. That's big. It's bigger than the school department. It's much bigger than any municipal departments. That's the money off the top. So let's talk through where all of these are coming from. The school budget, again, up by 3.6%. We continue to use the money for the override for the stated purpose. Where as part of the select board's change in fiscal policies, they increased the base amount of funding for the CIP from the operating budget from 6% to 6.6%. This year, in order to help the schools, we put that policy on pause and reduced that from 6.6% back down to where it used to be at 6%, in order to generate just over $2 million, which went through the town school split. So the schools got 60% of that money and the town got 40% of it. So again, wherever possible, we've been trying to assist the school department in the issues that they're facing. And I would just note, we're facing similar issues. So the idea, again, that we can project our way into this space and solve this problem. I would love to project my way out of making cuts to my budgets, but I can't do that. The current shortfall of $8.2 million from the fully loaded budget is being discussed by the school committee, and those decisions are ultimately the school committee's to make. There's a growth of 3.7%. That growth discrepancy is really a function of the override and how the override was phased in. The initial benefits from the override, remember, the override was $12 million phased in over a 3-year period. The initial benefit of the override really fell primarily to the schools because they had the need to fill the budget gap that was left by the ARPA funds that were used to float them for a year. So now you're seeing that balance out a little bit, a little more of the override. Total remaining override money is going to the town. So it's a slightly larger increase in growth, 3.7 versus 3.6. Again, this covers fixed costs and contractual increases. It prioritizes a reserve for salary and wage increases. I don't anticipate that reserve being sufficient to meet the needs of any contracts that we enter into. There's going to need to be more money somewhere to cover that in the event that a contract is settled, or in the case of the fire union, an arbitration agreement is reached and funded by town meeting. Some of the year 3 override initiatives that we continue to fund include additional age-friendly services, the Welcome to Brookline program that I mentioned, the mid-manager technical professional salary study. We are now almost complete with that work. It's really important to maintain competitive wages across all our positions, union and non-union. Particularly, we continue to be proud of the fact that we are continuing the building department reorganization. We have finished the analysis for social workers who were underpaid, and we're very happy to be paying them at a higher level. Other investments are being made with other funds. We are continually grateful for the gracious donation that allowed us to start up the sustainability division. The sustainability division's continued operations will obviously be a subject of discussion for the Expenditures and Revenues Study Committee, what that takes, what it's doing. I really do want to thank the entire DPW team, Commissioner Shute, and also the director, Alexandra Vecchio, who came over from the Parks Department. Sustainability is doing really exciting things and is making a major impact. So it's a very worthwhile investment, and I'm sure the town will see that as we discuss it. We discussed this research navigator position. We really want to continue along this the holistic model of social services. We want to address the person and not the problems. We're starting to see that bear out in the Housing Stability Office work that we're doing. It is exciting to really think about the possibility of the town being able to better connect people in need to the services that are available to them, even in a tight budgetary time, really, especially in a tight budgetary time. It's critically important for us to think about how we take care of our residents. And so that work really being spearheaded by Sigal Reese, the Commissioner of Public Health, is really excellent work. So again, to Sigal and her whole team, she's doing excellent work, as all departments are, in this whole of government effort to think about how social services are provided in Brookline. You can see here the override. Here we are at the end of the override plan. So the total plan included some money that was not part of the levy increase, but came from other sources. Talked about how we ultimately funded it. In FY26, the remaining 1.5 million went to the schools, 600,000 went to the CIP, and a little over 400,000 went to the town. This is where the departmental budgets are growing in the town. You can see which of those are override related increases and which are just some of the realities of the situation. For example, there are costs you can see that we are moving some of those ARPA funded costs over. The cybersecurity analyst, that is a mission critical position, as ransomware attacks and so forth increase. The sophistication with AI of dangers to our operations really can't be overstated. Can't be, whatever it is, understated. Whatever it is, it cannot be overstated. It can't be overstated. Thank you, John. We really need that level of effort in order to prevent serious disruption and really loss of money. You can see where all those items are coming in. Obviously, the single biggest item there is trash collection. That's net of our reductions in positions from moving some of those services over to the contract. It still is going to cost a significant amount of money, some of which we are funding through the increase in fees and some of which we are funding through the operating budget. Here are the reductions that we have made in order to meet where we need to be. You can see some of those things that are funded through ARPA or continuing on CDBG. And you can see elsewhere that reductions are being made based on where we have materials available, where we have money available to us. I don't subscribe to a policy of asking departments to return unrealized money automatically. I don't think that promotes sound fiscal policy. I think that encourages departments to spend everything they have, whether or not they need to. And so I want us to think more creatively about how to right-size our budgets. So I want to emphasize that I don't penalize departments for underspending their budgets. What we do is we analyze where money has historically and continually come back to us and think through why that is before we ask departments about making those reductions. So when people say, well, X department posted a surplus of this amount, there's a reason for that. And it is not because they didn't do a good job budgeting how much they needed. It's often because that number can be variable from year to year. or it's just the reality of what's needed in the event of additional costs that are incurred as part of that work. Here are the non-departmental expenditures. We talked about group health insurance, the 12% increase. We talked about the pension funding and how close we are to that full funding date. We have paused our increase in OPEB liability. That's the other post-employment benefits. The rate of investment return assumption is down. But again, we are still contributing to it. We are just not increasing our contribution. And you can see there, there's still, even though the total pot of money is smaller, let's say the total amount of money that we need to fully fund our pension is larger. We have further to go with OPEBs. So, and we're putting less money into it than we're putting into the pension. Debt service, special appropriations. We talked about how the revenue finance capital budget is at 20.3 million, of which 5.7 comes from general operating and 14.7 million from free cash. The debt service increases are 7.1 million, 19%. Total capital expenditures we talked about are 10.3%, which is above the select board's target of 8.1%, and that was increased this year. Non-appropriated and enterprise expenses. The MBTA assessment went up. Norfolk County's assessment went up slightly. The overlay for tax abatements went up slightly. Again, we are part of Norfolk County. Norfolk County has not disestablished its county government. In practice, that means we pay a lot of money to the county for the services that they provide. We were very grateful for the county's assistance during ARPA, but we still, there's still a fundamental question there as to why Norfolk County operates in that way when Suffolk and Middlesex do not. Enterprises, again, 3.2% growth, modest. There was an increase in the MWRA assessment, and there's some golf enterprise growth from the driving range. Policy issues and initiatives. The select board this year set their policy initiatives early, which was a great help to departments, and we're grateful for the select board for their assistance there. They separated them into 4 categories, of which there were 5 bullets each. Briefly, preserving our financial health. We talked about how the policies have been revised. We talked about the new reserves target. We talked about the expenditures and revenue study committee to try and have strategies to address structural deficits. Planning for the future. We've talked about how the comprehensive plan and the comprehensive plan steering committee, which is chaired by Paul Warren, is targeted to finish its work this calendar year. We continue to look at the Chestnut Hill West Study Group for the possibility of redeveloping that corner of Chestnut Hill West on the Newton border. We continue to integrate sustainability and natural resources and the Housing Stability Office. I do think it's important to note when we talk about the possibility of new growth and big projects, Chestnut Hill West is one of those big projects. It obviously has to be done right, and it has to be done to the community's satisfaction. At the end of the day, 100% of nothing is still nothing. If there is no agreement reached on that, then there will be no increase in revenue from that land at all. And so the community needs to evaluate as it goes through this iterative process, what's good enough? Where is the trade-off? Where is the level of trade-off necessary in terms of the benefits provided by what's ultimately developed there, any of the drawbacks, and what the potential for revenue is? No one factor is dispositive, but if nothing happens, I think that would be unfortunate. We want to ensure better, greener, income diverse housing. The HAB, the Housing Advisory Board, and the Community Preservation Act Committee both made contributions to the Brookline Housing Authority for the Walnut High Street redevelopment. That was part of the consensus plan that ultimately passed to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. That will create a significant amount of affordable housing close to public transit. It's a great initiative and it's a great opportunity for the community. We continue to implement the Harvard Street zoning overlay that was part of that consensus plan. There were some tweaks to that at fall town meeting, and we will continue to evaluate its opportunity for growth in a way that the community wants to see growth. And if there need to be further tweaks, those tweaks will be made. We need to ensure compliance with the state's ADU law and regulations. New draft regulations for ADUs are out. Our bylaw that we negotiated we believe is mostly, but not entirely in compliance with those. So we're going to need to go back and take another look at that. Obviously, again, we want to be careful. We need to create something that complies with the state's rules, or the state will just ignore what we put in place and allow developers to build what they want. So we just need to be on target with what the state is asking of us in trying to ensure that the community looks the way we want it to look. Predictability of outcomes is the number one thing that we hear from people when we ask them, why don't you want to build in Brookline? Why don't you want to invest in Brookline? And that is to say, they're worried that if they spend the time and money to come here and do planning and do studies, at some point, someone somewhere is going to tell them no, and they're not going to be able to understand why, and they're not going to be able to fix it. So there's a huge potential for sunk cost. They want from us consistency of outcomes. And again, a consistency of outcome can be no. It can be no, we don't want this, and we do want this. But as long as those outcomes are consistent, then people are willing to work within those parameters. But when there is, maybe you can do this, maybe you can't, this is gated behind something that has an inherently subjective component to it, or several things that have an inherently subjective component to it, that causes confusion. That adds to the cost of development, and that leads people to say, you know what, maybe I should go somewhere where I don't have that worry. So it is just an area where, the community needs to be clear about what it wants. And that's a big part of what the comprehensive plan is doing, is talking about that in broad strokes. What does the community want to look like? Finally, improving the public way for all users. The final phase in of $2.1 million and an override commitment for the streets and roads. We're also updating the roadway and sidewalk policies. Again, the DPW Engineering and Transportation Division has been doing great work on this. I believe the Transportation Board voted to approve those revised policies, and we're going to see those policies come before the Select Board in the spring. That will allow us to continue complete streets work while also being able to concurrently prioritize immediate repairs without necessarily undertaking a full complete streets process. We want to continue growing charging capacity for electric vehicles, particularly fast charging. We want to right-size the amount of chargers we have out there now. We have a robust level 2 charging network. We want to make sure that that's the right amount, not too many, not too little. And of course, the $30 million Washington Street redevelopment. The Select Board has provided oversight there and ensured that there's increased community input, both in Brookline Village and in Washington Square, along with a wayfinding project. So as that project continues, there's more opportunity for community input. So both town and school departments need to make cuts to come into alignment with the revenue projections. These gaps are not ones we can project our way out of. Using one-time funds to paper over these issues will not solve them in the long term and will lead to increased borrowing costs. I say could, but I will be honest with you, it will. And at the end of the day, increased borrowing costs mean less money for operating revenues. So I don't want us to cut off our nose to spite our face. I don't want us to look for easy solutions only to have worse problems confront employees, students, people who live here, reductions in services. I want us to find lasting solutions to these problems. I don't want us to patch them. The town will provide support to the school department to help identify the sources of overruns there and help the school department implement its own controls to prevent future issues. I think this is really crucial. One of the elements of the process that we're now going through with the recommended school deficit review is that at the end of it, we've suggested that what's necessary is a binding agreement between the Select Board, the school committee, and the advisory committee committing to do certain things. That is not a suggestion that the school committee's authority is going to be abrogated in some way. It is a desire on all of our parts to commit to doing the right thing. So it is not the Select Board saying, hey, school committee, you have to do this. It is all of us agreeing there needs to be more transparency. There need to be better controls put in place. And here, based on the results of that deficit analysis, are what those things are. We're going to commit to those things. We're going to commit to regular meetings to ensure that they're actually happening. We're going to commit to transparency and open books so that we can verify that it's happening. And we're going to provide support where necessary. If we need to provide additional shared services on the town side to make this work, that's what we're going to do. It's really my goal to continue to provide, synergy and avoid duplicative work with the schools wherever possible. And that's a direction we need to move in. So it's not this memorandum of agreement, I've heard concerns from community members. Oh, is this some sort of takeover? It's not. It really is just laying out, all right, we've identified the problem. What are we going to do to fix it? And all of us have a part to play in that. The Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee will receive presentations from town and schools alike on the pressure points they face, and will ultimately be charged with making a recommendation on how to address those pressures long term. My goal is to have the first standalone meeting of that committee in early March. At that meeting, we will hopefully set a timeline for each of the meetings to come. What are the goals and objectives? What will we accomplish at each meeting? And how will we get an ultimate report out to the community in enough time for us to be able to have an impact on the FY27 budget and to make a recommendation early on whether or not there needs to be an override on the ballot in May of 26. All right, I've talked long enough. Thank you very much for your patience. Now I'd like to invite Melissa Goff up to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Chaz. I also want to echo thanks for the budget team. I think that Charlie has really done some outstanding work with OpenGov. As we were preparing this document, I think that we also kind of realized that we're almost preparing two different budgets. You've got your paper book that everybody is used to having, but we've really made a lot of strides in the online version as well. A lot of the things that used to be images are now tables that people with screen readers can click through. It's really a lot of effort to make that happen, especially where OpenGov is constantly looking to improve their product as well. And they say, oh, we've got these next gen reports and all these reports look great. Oh, but you have to rebuild everything. So it is a lot of effort. I really appreciate the work that Charlie has put into it. And Tyler and Nicole have been really helpful getting a lot done too. And I'm also grateful to Lincoln, as we're kind of developing our projections and meeting on strategies for addressing budget deficits, he's in the room to kind of help us with that and provide a lot of perspective based on his experience in other communities as well. So just really grateful for the team that we have. So a lot of these slides are more for kind of revisiting after the presentation is done. I don't expect that I can't even read it from the podium here, but these are kind of overall summaries of the financial plan. Some of these have already been discussed with Chaz, so I'll go a little bit quicker through the slides the rest of the presentation. So this is just a snapshot of the financial plan summary with the general fund revenue, the enterprises, how they factor in there as well, and then the appropriations for overall growth of 4.4%. This slide here is a picture of what we try to project in terms of what the actual school allocation is. We basically take an exercise that we do at the end of the fiscal year, which is having town departments report their services on behalf of the schools. We take that data and we put it into the fiscal 26 budget as a projection, as a way to estimate what the true cost of education is. So we get that 57.9 is the current estimate for fiscal 26. This is a summary of the general fund. So you can see that our revenue is growing by 4.5%. Then you have to deduct your non-appropriated items, which we don't have any control over. And then once you do that, you have $407 million available for appropriation. And then you can see how the appropriations are spread across the town departments for the operating budget total. And then you factor in your capital improvement program in there as well. And that's how you get to your 4.6%. This is just another snapshot of local receipts. This is a table that can also be found in OpenGov as well. Some of these increases Chaz has already talked about, local option taxes being one of the biggest. We have a new hotel that came online for half of the year last year. So we're seeing kind of the full impact of that coming into fiscal 26. Seeing a little bit of increased activity around parking and court fines. You'll see that the parking, the refuse fee, that $485,000 is directly related to the fees recently voted by the select board. That continues to be a pressure on the budget because of the other adjustments that we needed to make for the contract as well. Another articulation of free cash. We don't have free cash certified just yet. We're hoping that we'll get that in the coming days. As we're filing the warrant article, we may need to make some refinements to the final CIP in order to adjust for whatever the free cash number ends up being, but this is a pretty solid estimate coming from finance. And then you can see how the waterfall, the town's policy around the allocation of free cash is is met. So the operating reserve, 75% of our reserve fund is coming from the operating budget. 25% is coming from free cash. So that 853, that's how we're meeting that goal. Unreserved stabilization fund. So we're talking about the importance of our fund balances in terms of preserving our AAA rating. We are appropriating $3.5 million to the stabilization fund. 2.7 is unappropriated, but supports the overall fund balance goal. The liability fund has a target of 1% of prior year net revenue. We looked at that balance at the end of the year. Obviously, the advisory committee most recently voted a settlement that will change that number. That will likely factor into fiscal 27's recommendation on the allocation of free cash, but just be mindful that that's still looming out there. Our CIP, we talked about that we were looking to get to 8.1% of prior year net revenue. We do get there thanks to the healthy free cash certification. And it also lessens the impact of reducing the operating revenue from 6.6% to 6% for the CIP. Well, once we satisfy the first 4 obligations, we take 15% of whatever is left after that, and we appropriate that to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Chaz already mentioned that is something that we're hoping that we can retain with careful control of the current projected deficits on both the town and the school side. And then after that, what's available, we can appropriate for special use, one-time items. In the past, we've used it to support OPEBs. We've used it to support our pension system. If there are other trust funds that have a low balance, we have used that to bolster those trust funds as well. And so for this year, we are recommending that the full amount be devoted to the capital improvement plan. This is just a snapshot of our fund balance position. And, we had been probably, 3 or 4 years ago, we were at a point where we were actually below what was the previous target of 10% of revenue. And we have been consciously adding money into the stabilization fund in order to meet the target. We meet with Moody's every year as we get our bonds for the upcoming year. And, they last year talked about the revised policies that they have, the way that they measure the town overall. And so we needed to revise our fiscal policies in order to, keep pace with those changes and keep our position. So that's around the recommendation for the $3.5 million. This just shows the expenditure growth throughout the town. So you can see that $7.1 million, that is directly related to the additional debt service that we're taking on specifically for both the Pierce School and the fire station projects. And then coming in behind that is the school budget, the town departments, and then benefits behind that. This is a snapshot of our pension system and the funding plan that we have for our pension schedule. I will say that as we get closer and closer to 2030 and we need to kind of recalibrate our plan, every 2 years, the retirement board looks at the schedule and resets. And so the shorter of a timeline that we have for that, if there are adjustments that need to be made to the system, it kind of makes it a little bit more volatile to get to that 2030 funding date. Right now, our annual increase is 7.85%. We have a rate of return assumption of 6.8% that was recently lowered at the most recent actuarial schedule. We were at 6.9 the last schedule. And last year we were able to add some free cash to also support the pension schedule in fiscal 25. OPEBs. So the OPEB funding plan right now is pretty static because we are not increasing it by $250,000. We did pause that during COVID. We resumed it in fiscal 25, but we're looking to pause it again in fiscal 26. We're going to have Charlie come and talk about the enterprise and revolving funds, and then I'll step back in.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the board. So as you all may know, well, first of all, I'm Charlie Young. I'm the Assistant Town Administrator for Finance here. As you all may know, we have a few funds that we budget separately from the general fund. They're outside the operating budget. You can hear more about these from the relevant department heads, but I'll just give you a quick bird's eye view. This is kind of a blizzard of numbers, but I'll go through the major categories, that are shown here and are increasing. So first up, we have water and sewer, which is increasing by overall about 3%. This is funded primarily by water and sewer ratepayers and the charges. there. That with the 3% increase, we're adding funds for a new permanent inspector position that will be helping with both DPW and capital projects. We're increasing funds for contractual services and supplies. There's a significant increase in capital for vehicle replacements. Our MWRA assessment is going up by 2% in FY26. And most significantly, you'll see an increase in interfund transfers out, which is associated with the 12% group health increase that we're seeing. That's water and sewer. Next up, we have the Golf Course Enterprise Fund, which is increasing by about 11%. This is funded primarily by green fees, but other things such as the pro shop and concessions. The increases here are for wages and steps. There's a significant increase in capital for golf course improvements, and you'll see an increase in debt service as well. That is for previously approved and authorized borrowings for improvements to the golf course. And then you'll see a pretty significant, once again, increase in interfund transfers out, which is again associated with the high increase in group health costs. And so finally, our recreation revolving fund, which is funded directly by the program fees that the revolving fund charges, is increasing by 8%, and that is adding funds for a new assistant director of early childhood education to provide some much needed support to those programs. It increases funding in both personnel and services for camp programs to expand those, and adds funds for a new registration software, which will hopefully as well benefit their programming. And finally, there's an increase in interfund transfers for group health. So once again, these are our funds that are funded outside of the general fund. If you want to hear more, the relevant department heads will be talking about them at their budget meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. A component of the financial plan is also the capital improvement program. A lot of this we've already talked about as well. Despite the reduction from 6.6 to 6%, we are still investing $222 million over the life of the plan, which is approximately $32 million a year. We had our budget workshop with the select board, and we are continuing to focus on deferred maintenance, which has been an area for the past couple of years that the board has really emphasized that we need to invest in our CIP. We have a robust street rehab program. We are continuing our roof and envelope programs. We have a lot of money going towards the elevator program that Charlie has, life safety as well, a lot of really good things in the CIP. This is just another snapshot that's also in the document that shows the components of the CIP and how we get to the funding policy, and when we add free cash to that policy and then the debt exclusions, what the overall level of funding is for the capital plan. These are some projects that are coming up through the plan. So we have our fire apparatus program in fiscal 26, and then in the out years as well. We have the Washington Street program, which I'm sure everyone is very familiar with. A lot of public hearings, a lot of discussion about that program and the potential state aid that would state grant that would be coming from that as well. The new Lincoln School grounds, that is a new item that was previously in future years and is being pulled into fiscal 26 for design work. I spent some time this summer with the new Lincoln principal and Helen Charlupski and Alexandra Vecchio, kind of looking at the overall condition there. And it's something that is definitely at a failure point. So we swapped that with the Boylston Street playground because that playground needs to stay open while Pierce is currently at Old Lincoln. So it kind of made sense to make that swap. And then Sewell athletic fields are in the out years of the plan at $6.5 million. So our long-range plan, this is something that we talk about with the board every year, where we are, making projections for the out years. We're talking about our collective bargaining assumptions. We're talking about our assumptions for steps and lanes and overall growth. There are a lot of assumptions that are outlined in the overall budget, and then we are looking at, the structural gap that exists between our revenues and expenditures. Every year the challenge is to close that gap. And, it's definitely getting a lot more challenging in more recent years as well, especially around with our group health numbers and with our inflation costs as well. This is just another blizzard that shows kind of the components of the long-range forecast. So you can see the assumptions around revenue, and then you can see the assumptions around expenditures as well. I will say that, in 2030, the picture does look a little bit rosier with the revenue and expenditure numbers being pretty similar. The only reason why it looks like that is because that is when we start to see the runoff from the paying of the pension system. So one of the things that I'm hoping that the Expenditure and Revenue Committee would look at is to encourage the town to take the runoff from paying off the pension system and use it to address the long-term OPEB liability. So that's just an explanation on the 2030 outcome. And this is just another snapshot that just shows the growth in revenue and expenditures and the pressure that that provides as well. So that is the end of the presentation. I'm going to pull the slides down. Chaz and I and Charlie and Lincoln are here for questions, and we'll see how far we get.
Okay, any questions, John?
So, thank you very much for the presentations and, really a good starting point for all of this. But I thought for sure I saw a discrepancy between a really important number in Melissa's presentation and in Chaz's presentation, and that's the free cash number, which was 20 million in Chaz's presentation, but was 23 million in your presentation.
Yep. So the 23 is what we're anticipating to be the certified number, but we'd never appropriate the full amount. So the 20.8 is what we're appropriating. That's the difference between those two numbers.
It's the best fiscal practices, right, is to leave a portion of that unappropriated. And what that actually does is it forms the kernel of next year's free cash. So the policy is to leave a small amount of money unappropriated so that we always have something.
So, but then that will show up in a larger number than is currently in your budget for non-appropriated.
So we basically, it's not part of the budget equation. It's essentially a starting point for next year. So it will basically, so in the current certification, the 23.5, I think, or something like that, 2.7 of that, we didn't appropriate last year. So it kind of perpetuates itself year over year.
Yeah. Okay, but on the books, what is it labeled?
So it's not part of the revenue number.
It's not.
No.
Okay.
So let me, if I just pull up one more, the free cash slide, I think that probably articulates it a little bit better.
While Melissa is doing that, if advisory committee members want to participate and also expenditure and revenue study committee members, if you're online, please raise your hand. In the room, we have this floating mic that we can pass around, or you can approach the podium either way. So I'm
And raise your hand so I can see them. Wait till she's finished.
done?
Are you done, John?
Well, I think
Melissa,
Melissa was about to answer.
So the
question.
23.5 is the top line number there, but
Yeah.
if you deduct 2.7 million from that, that's where you get the 20.8.
Yeah, but I don't see the 2.7 million deducted in what's in front of us here.
Wait, Cliff? Okay,
So let me ask a question. Cash comes in, it goes on to the balance sheet of the town.
Yep.
Right? So it's not running through revenue. And then you appropriate off the balance sheet $20 million to go into the revenue.
Yep.
Leaving the other on the
Correct.
balance sheet.
Correct.
That's why it's not in the income statement.
Yeah,
We're looking at.
okay.
Okay.
But it is on the balance sheet.
It's on the balance sheet.
Okay.
Mike?
I have a general question about this or a request really about transparency. And for several years when I was in the advisory committee, you recall that I asked that the budget include the cost of healthcare allocated by department. And honestly, I've given up on that since I've been on the select board. But I would like to see it, even though I'm going off the select board. I would very much like to see it allocated by town and school, that is added directly to the town budget, added directly to the school budget, because I think people are missing $25 million more or less worth of school costs. So then when we look at that $141 million or whatever it is it's going to the schools this year, or is recommended for the schools this year out of the budget, there's 25 million more or less missing from that. And there are other items, as you've said, that you look at and you allocate between the two when you report to the state. It may be too much to ask to allocate relatively small amounts of money in that way, but the healthcare cost is so significant, and it's what, 2/3 or so schools, that it seems to me it would be much clearer, not just for those of us reading the budget from the perspective of, okay, where's our money going, but also from the perspective of the public and from the perspective of people who are employed in both the town and the schools. So I would urge you to take a look at that at least for next year, and perhaps it's even possible to do it for this year.
So in section 2, we do have a table that does allocate all of the benefit costs associated and into each departmental budget. So you do see us attempt to estimate it. I will say that the prior town school formula used to allocate the benefits based on the usage, but now it's just taken off the top. That's something that the Revenue and Expenditure Committee could look at. I think that, as departments are, requesting positions and saying, oh, I want, this position's only $50,000, and that doesn't seem like a big amount.
Right.
Well, I always say, well, a family plan in our most heavily subscribed program is about $29,000.
Yeah.
So, that already kind of blows you away when you're thinking about trying to fund just one position. So, that's definitely something that I think when Susan was starting to kind of look at some of the numbers and asking for estimates on group health, it was a little surprising, especially because of our premium split. 83% is a really high number, especially compared to other communities as well.
Well, I think to the extent that you can bring that forward to the top of the presentation, that would be useful. The $29,000 is a really startling number, even to me. But to the extent that you can take the aggregate number that's going to the schools and the aggregate number that's going to town employees, I'm not quarreling with the allocation. I'm not quarreling with our support of healthcare. What I am saying is that I'd like to see the numbers much more prominently and much more, as I say, much more at the top.
Yep.
Oh,
I want to echo the many thank yous for the hard work. I can only imagine how much it takes to put this book together. So it's, when we do this next year, I'm hoping that the other half, or the more than other half of the budget, is actually present, the school department. It's very hard to have this discussion without more than 50% of the budget present. And one of the things that I just am unclear about, and I would actually ask that we consider as the select board sending this request to the school department, I'd like to see a maintenance level of service budget from them. I don't know what it is. It's not 149 million. I don't know what it is, but it would be really informative and helpful to understand if they just met their contractual obligations from collective bargaining without adding and expanding services, what would be the budget request? It's probably more than 141 million. I'm certain that it's less than 149 million. So I see one colleague from the school committee, yeah, this would be Jesse. Hi, Jesse. This is really important. This is a really important request, I think, and information that we need. And I would hope that since we're talking and we put together the entire budget, that we would formally ask them for a maintenance level budget number.
don't we have that?
We don't have, we don't have that directly from them. No, we have their fully loaded budget. I've had conversations with school department employees about that issue, but it's not, their conversations with me are not my numbers to give, right? I would ask them for a formal,
Right, I agree with you, but the first thing you mentioned earlier, and you went by it really quickly, we're bailing them out this year. right? They are
Asking for us to bail.
they're asking us, and Chaz has proposed, he didn't get specific, but he hinted in the area, the bucket. You know, I think they're currently at 2.5 million overspending their budget. Overspending, that's not projecting in the future next year. It's this year they have overspent their budget by approximately $2.5 million. Now they're trying to close that and it might come down, but where does that money come from? It needs to come from us or the reserve fund. I'd like to know how much money is in the reserve fund. Maybe they need to go to ask for a reserve fund. There's probably not enough there.
I mean, I will say, we're going to have to ask for a reserve fund transfer too. So I just want to be clear that there are issues on both sides of the
Right.
ledger there. You know, on our end, it's overtime. It's
Right.
public safety overtime.
Right.
So we're not alone in that.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but my point is that I think it would be really helpful for us to understand if they just maintained the level of service that they have this year, next year, and met their contractual obligations, what would be the number? It would be very, very helpful to know that.
Okay, David?
In your discussion about the CIP and how there was going to be an effort to dedicate 6.6% of revenue, and we decided to hold off on that at 6%, and that essentially brought another 2 million for the schools. What is the rate that's most typically seen in other municipalities? Is it 6%? Is it 6.6? Is it 7? Do we know?
It varies. Melissa, do you have a sense?
Yeah, I think it varies. I mean, these are our fiscal policies. We've been operating at 6% for over a decade, for probably over 20 years. This most recent override brought another $2 million into, and that's why the policy drifted back up to 6.6. And now we're saying, well, we've been operating at 6%. Let's live with that for one more year. In the out years of the plan, I'm anticipating that we are going back to 6.6. And that's something that if the Expenditure and Revenue Committee looks at, kind of what the implication of staying at that would be.
I think it's worth knowing what other comparable communities set for that. And I'm not weighing in one way or the other about whether that's an appropriate level. But if 0.6% using our numbers is 2 million, that's a significant amount. And so just being able to know what the comps are.
Yep.
Okay.
Excuse me, can I just
Yeah.
follow onto that?
Sure, quickly, and then Harry.
Yeah, so, but what we're saying is that we're taking $2 million out of the override in effect, and not spending it on what we expected to spend it when we got the voters to approve of it, and putting it back into into basically one of the elements of the operating budget, the school budget in this case.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, money is fungible, right? Like we have met our obligation for the roads, for example. That was a key priority of the override because we were just not spending enough money. Like our roads were getting worse every year because we just didn't have enough money in the CIP for them. Now, at least we're getting at a point where they're hopefully not deteriorating. And that is a part of the override. So we're still spending that money. It's just that then other items in the CIP that we might have otherwise funded with that money are not getting funded.
We're still hitting the target.
Right, although as you say, money is fungible.
Money is fungible.
And so you in order to cover that, we're honoring what we said to the voters by cutting something else that we hadn't promised.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, Harry?
Thank you, Bernard, and thank you for the presentation. My question is sort of like Paul Warren's, but coming at it from a different way. If we took last year's actual school budget and increased it by 3.6 or 3.8%, what would happen to that $8 million deficit for FY26? Do we know how much that would go down?
I don't quite understand the question here.
So the question was the $8 million school deficit for FY26 was because it was based upon a fully loaded budget.
Right.
That had all kinds of things in it. If you simply took last year's school budget and increased it by the same amount that the town, say, is increasing, which I think from an earlier slide was like 3.6 or 3.8%.
Yeah.
What would happen to the 8 million? How much does it go down?
I mean, it would go away, right? That's
okay.
41
Or they'd have to figure out a way of cutting.
Right. Yeah, right. It would be because you would hit if if it increased by that amount, you're basically saying what would happen if the school budget came in at the projected revenue, number here. So yeah, what would happen would be that number would disappear because the school would be submitting a budget that was commensurate with the amount of increase in revenues. You might have some discrepancy there depending on what the actual increase is there. For example, the town's increase, I think, is 3.7 and the schools is 3.6. So, there'd be some minor discrepancy, but what you're saying is if the schools presented a budget that increased by 3.7% from the prior fiscal year, then that's right. That's where we'd be,
Okay, because I guess what I'm trying to get at is on this fully loaded thing, if you took out all the extra requests, where does that leave them? And just trying to make sense of what in this budget is a reasonable amount of growth and what is sort of what I would term to be new growth, which is programs that they're not doing now, for instance. But I think I have my answer. Thank you.
So I think the biggest open question there stems from actually their current deficit, which is, sure, I think you can make that request of them, but I think they would not come back with a level funded budget that met that target. I think even if they only met their contractual obligations, they would still be over. And then layered on top of that is the deficit that they are experiencing in this fiscal year, which is primarily driven by unexpected special education costs or unbudgeted special education costs. So if you make the assumption that you have to spend that money, which is that's the assumption they're making, then you already have that on top of this. So it's not as if 8.2 million fully loaded is all new, nice to have initiatives. And the school department's position is some of those, even if we were to cut all the way back to the bone and say, that's it, a true level funded budget, only contractual increases, we wouldn't be where we need to be. And we have to layer on top of that the fact that special education is a necessity, and we're already in the hole this fiscal year on special education. So I don't think that alone will solve our problem, unfortunately.
Cliff?
I think Chaz just sort of said what I was going to say. Harry, I don't think Harry's question and Paul's question were the same. I mean, Paul's question is the one that's of interest. I do think I'm surprised that it's not available. You haven't seen it yet, because I think that school department, when they make a presentation to their finance committee and the school committee itself, I think that is a number that they do discuss in terms of, what it's going to cost to keep the steady state. There clearly are additions. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I think that information should be easily forthcoming, and I agree that you should have it.
Well,
Yeah, I just wanted to tweak a little bit on what you're saying, because because they're overspending this year. I guess what I'm looking for is not the maintenance of service budget would be, what are you forecasting to be your actual spend this year? And then add on top of that any contractual legal obligations that you have. And that to me is what a maintenance level of service would be. Now, as long as I know an audit's going to be done, and as long as that extra 2.5 million is valid, and was needed to be legally done, and of course, but if it wasn't, then it probably would be backed out. But anyway, that I think Cliff clarified it. It would be helpful.
Dennis, did you?
Sarah has.
Yeah, I mean, if
Yes,
we're done with
sure.
that particular topic, I had a couple of questions related to group health. There was one thing that Charlie had mentioned in his presentation around the interfund transfers, which I didn't understand when you were presenting it. And I wasn't sure whether those transfers for group health were basically just accounting for health costs that were associated with those funds, or
So enterprise funds are required to pay for the benefits associated with the people in those funds. So they send the general fund revenue to pay for their benefits.
okay. And then the other question is to leverage off of what you mentioned earlier when you said, well, that 83% number is a really high number. So would you care to elaborate on that? And how can we start the dialogue to to change that.
Yeah, I think, when we entered the GIC, we were one of the first communities to do under Section 19, which the rules were different and they changed probably a couple years after we joined the GIC, where the threshold to enter was not as high. So we are kind of bound by the original agreement that essentially, in order to change it, you need a majority of the PEC to agree to it. I think it's a majority plus one other group. So it's a real hurdle for us to make any substantial changes in that way. I think we have, we've been talking with our PEC about the desire to, mitigate some of these costs and bring them down. And I think that given the current climate, there might be more appetite to continue those discussions. Chaz, I don't know if you want to add anything else about kind of what we're trying to do in terms of, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I think it's really important for all of our partners in this, who are the PEC members, are the unions and the retirees. So we need to have a conversation with that group as we continue to go through this process, both with the deficit analysis on the school side and as we continue with this budget process, to then be able to go to them and say, look, here are the cuts that are coming. And here's what we can stave off if we move away from 83-17. Historically, there hasn't been appetite for that, and I understand why. But the reality is, if we want to avoid cuts, let alone settling contracts, that number has to change. The alternative is layoffs. That's just what it is.
Okay, Sarah?
I don't have a new thing to bring up. Just to close out what we were talking about before, is Paul, I feel like you're asking the right questions, and obviously, and that was what I wanted to be prepared with tonight before I came. And so I made sure to ask the chair, do you consider this a levelly funded budget? And he said that he wasn't able to answer that yet. So we have work to do, and we will get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I wanted to also point out that we had hand raises from Elisa Jones online and Anthony Bono and Dick Benka and David.
Okay, it's not popping up on my machine, on my computer, but let's go to Janet first. I think she had her hand up.
Hi,
And,
Janet Galbard. I'm a member of this brand new committee. I think it would be helpful in gathering information. It's something we asked for many years ago, to get the comps of the full cost of employment, because I think our salaries may be running a little bit low, but our benefit contribution is really high. So if we're doing comps, this is something I know Cliff asked for 10 years ago when I first met you, which is we need to see that fully loaded thing. I know some school districts, and this is just off the top of my head, and very small sample, they're providing 50% support, which I think is totally underfunded. But when we asked for this in the past, it was sort of up and down and we weren't getting full information, but it was really, really be helpful to see salary ranges, not just average salaries, because averages aren't good, but maybe median range if you were a teacher in each of these places, if you were a social worker in each of these places, what would the full salary benefit amount be? Thank you.
Hey, Dick Benka.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Two questions. One, following up on the GIC discussion. When we entered the GIC, it was, I think, the most cost-effective health care option that was available. And I'm wondering whether it still is. Are other communities staying with the GIC? Are there alternatives to the GIC that we've looked at, or is that not worth an inquiry?
Unfortunately, the issues that are facing in healthcare are pretty global at this point. The barometer that I use is whether or not someone chases after me at the MMA conference to ask whether or not I want to switch out of the GIC, and this year no one did. Okay. I've been in conversation with other town managers and administrators in Norfolk County, And for those folks who are out of the GIC, the numbers they're seeing are higher. They're seeing 14 and 15%. So just by virtue of the fact that we're bundling risk, the number is lower. But the only people who are really seeing anything lower are people who are truly self-insured, people who are building their own plans and not participating in conjunction with a bigger, or, you know, have more control over what they provide in terms of benefits and costs, as opposed to buying into a plan that's then administered by a larger group like Blue, or part of a larger risk pool like Blue Cross does.
And I would say that what we've been seeing over the past couple of years has been kind of a COVID hangover. People who were deferring their health care during the pandemic are now coming back, and either their conditions are getting worse. And I mean, we're seeing it across the state. Another, you know, just another example, another manager in another community, the rate increase that they were seeing is 16.9%. So, you know, it's being seen everywhere.
Okay, thank you.
I
The
think
second broad question goes to the one-time funding question, or the limited year funding question of ARPA, grants that we might receive, and so forth. I looked in the financial plan, and on page 58 to 61, there's a brief discussion of ARPA. You alluded to ARPA in your presentation, Chaz. You also alluded to some grants. There's an ARPA tracking page on the town's website. What I'm wondering, and I couldn't find it anywhere, and maybe it's there and I've missed it, but is there any place that crosswalks ARPA funding, grant funding, essentially one-time non-recurring funding on the town side and the school side to positions and programs in the FY26 budget, so that we can get some idea of whether there are programs that are that the funding sources are going to be disappearing for, or aren't guaranteed the way that recurring property taxes are. Is there some crosswalk somewhere that we could put our hands on?
We have some of that individually. We certainly do that for ARPA. We check that on a regular basis. Tyler and Nicole and the whole team bring it to us to talk through, knowing that, right, there's once December 31, 26 comes around, that's it, we're done. So anything that's funded on ARPA needs to come off or be eliminated. The other stuff is more discrete. The other grant funded things are more discrete. And again, there are not that many grant funded positions out there that would be, which we tried to really avoid putting lines on funds that are susceptible to pressures like that. The exceptions are obviously when we do things like piloting sustainability, which was something that we agreed to do and we went into with open eyes. And then, you know, things that were longer term on the ARPA side of things, like the administration of the grants. I don't know if Melissa wants to.
Yeah, I would just say that throughout the financial plan in each of the individual departmental budgets, there are line items that are indicated as offsets, and we have the backup behind those offsets and what they tie to. So I think we can make that a little bit clearer. Charlie and I have been talking about kind of building out external funds a little bit more robustly, you know, going forward. I think if we didn't have so much rebuilding to do in OpenGov, that we likely would have been able to get there, but you want to add?
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And really quick, just wanted to add that if you go to section 2 and you look at the FTE tables, we have added a little bit of a crosswalk that shows how many employees are being funded outside of the general fund. So it shows total FTEs, it shows those funded outside the general fund, and gives you net FTEs. And it is broken out by, say, funded by capital appropriations versus funded by grants. And so you can get a sense of how many of our FTEs, not necessarily programs, I think that's a fair request, are being funded by grants or outside sources. And then, as Melissa said, those offset lines where you see a negative number in a department budget table is referring to something outside the operating budget that's funding that program or those individual FTEs.
Okay, thank you all. It's just something that I think might become relevant, just putting on my E and RSC hat here as we go forward. looking into the future. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
David, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
But hold on, Tiffany, who else on?
I also had a hand from Elisa Jonas online. Anthony Bono raised a hand.
I got him.
Mr. Dodd,
John Doggett raised his hand.
Okay,
to get you flags or something.
okay, Paul, I mean, David.
I'm curious at what other levers you've looked at in addition to the CIP that could be adjusted to potentially realize certain funds. So we hear a lot of discussion about free cash, but of course, as you mentioned, Chaz, by state guidelines, we really need to be within 5 and 7%, and we're only at 5.3, which is within the range, but potentially perilous. And so I don't think we would want to touch that. But what are other categories where we can adjust sort of the number we look at as a percentage of revenue to potentially find certain shifts?
Just the other things that flow through the waterfall. So it's our reserve fund contribution, it is our liability fund contribution, it is the overall undesignated fund balance. I mean, these are all things that are kind of higher on the priority level than the CIP. So that's why we adjusted the CIP.
Okay.
Okay, Lisa Jonas.
Hi, thank you, Bernard. I'm just wondering if we have two questions. One is if someone could provide any information on our OPEB liabilities compared to other communities in Greater Boston, and also how the level of the amount of our liability affects our ratings.
Sure, I'm gonna ask Lincoln to add a little bit more to this. I think that we can be very proud of where we are relative to OPEBs, and especially in varying communities. Our OPEB trust has over $100 billion in it, which is, far above and beyond kind of where other communities are. I will say that, Moody's does recognize this, but they, have given us kind of that's great that that's there, but you really need to focus on your fund balance. And that's kind of why the free cash has gone from funding OPEBs to funding the overall fund balance. But I don't know if you want to talk about other communities as well.
Sure. You're welcome.
Thanks, Melissa. So Lincoln Heineman, the town's director of finance. So as Melissa said, we have a total, as of the last measurement date, which was this past June 30th, the actuarial measurement date. We had a total liability of $301.7 million, of which $104.9 million is funded. So that's 34.75%. So I would say we're really sort of in the mid-range there. There's certainly many municipalities, particularly smaller municipalities and other governmental units in Massachusetts that are far behind that, who haven't, begun to fund their OPEB liability in any significant way. And there are a few Massachusetts municipalities that have exceeded that. I'd say we're in the mid-range. As Melissa said, I think a key factor there is, as she said in our last conversations with Moody's, with our ratings agency, the key metric that we had appreciable control over is the reserve fund. And so, I think there's a recognition on the part of Moody's that we've made progress towards OPEB, that it's important, but they also recognize that there's a plan coalescing around meeting the OPEB obligation once the outstanding pension obligation is met, hopefully in 2030. So.
Good, yeah, thank you. And I did have one more question, just following up on Dick Benka's. I'm wondering whether there were any grants, federal grants to the town that have been frozen at all, any of the funding, or have we not been affected? And also, is it too early to start projecting where we might be losing funds and how we might deal with that?
It's too early. We know what the total potential exposure is, right? It's around 3 million. We have not yet, what we've heard from our direct conversation with the federal government is silence. Wherever possible, the things that we are drawing regularly, we've been able to draw on. What we don't know is if any more money that is more irregular in nature will continue to be forthcoming.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Tony, Anthony.
Thank you, and thank you for the
And
presentation.
by the way, next, Brian Berger on the Pardon?
Brian is not a member of any of these groups.
Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for calling on me. I have a quick question. So does the CIP count towards our overall fund balance that Moody's is looking at? Because I thought it didn't count towards that, but does it? Like the CIP balance fund or?
No, I mean, I think, I'm not sure.
Sorry, when you're putting 9 million for special purpose into the CIP, that money's getting allocated directly and it's not being recorded by Moody's as.
No, they look at our overall allocation of funds. So they look at our capital plan. They look at our level of debt. They look at what we are investing in our capital plan. So that is part of the overall equation.
Okay, so I guess my question is, if we have like this 9 million left over that could be utilized in special use, is there a reason why we've chosen to, or so far chosen to go 9 million into capital improvement and not beef up cash reserves, if that is something that we're worried about in the future?
I think that we are trying to gradually boost our fund balance position without jeopardizing the funding requests in the CIP. I think, we do have a number of requests year over year, and knowing that we are pulling back on CIP this year and that we're also increasing our revenue estimates for local receipts, I think we're worried about the out years of the CIP. So to try and bolster in 26 while we have the money in hand, that was the strategy around the use of the $9 million.
Great. And I'm going to ask one more question. Since the full employment, as Chaz was talking about, the full employment reaching that has not helped the overtime issue in a meaningful way. Is there a longer strategy on how to deal with that problem? Is there something being developed right now?
Yeah, we're working, and again, it's different. I want to say, be clear, the police are not at full employment, right? There are 6 positions in the police department that are held open. They are at full modified employment. And that will shift somewhat. For example, there are folks who are on the books who may be retiring in short order, who may have injuries on duty that are preventing them from, being a part of that. So all of that are things that we're looking at when we're trying to evaluate how we can address those. But at the end of the day, the biggest lever that we have there in both the police and the fire departments is staffing. There needs to be serious conversations about how many people staff, how many shifts. And that's really where we need to have conversations.
John?
What, can I comment on Anthony's question?
Yeah, very quick. Yeah.
I think it's really important to recognize that the CIP, capital expenses that come into the CIP are not really discretionary. You may be able to postpone something for a year, but ultimately, if you do too much postponing, your capital plan goes downhill in a big way, and it goes down much faster the longer you wait. So you have this gradual drop off, sort of like streets, as we've heard from the DPW commissioner. The streets gets a little bit worse, and then if you don't do anything about it, it gets a lot worse in a hurry. And I think that's true of parks. It's true of a lot of capital investment that we have. So that $9 million is not just, oh yeah, we could do something else with it. If we do something else with it, there are consequences.
John?
Hi, John Doggett, Advisory Committee. I think, Chaz, you might have addressed some of this question, but that Alyssa asked concerning the Fed fund risk. Or not funding risk. I just would like to, you said $3 million for the schools. You didn't have a figure, but maybe you could enlighten us as to an estimate. Number one. The second is the school more at risk, more schools more at risk than the town, or is the same? And any assessment of the size of that risk? In other words, is it something that we want to run Plan B budget or not at that level?
I would say, so I don't want to be I don't want to cause alarm. I don't have a handle. I don't have my hands around how much money on the school side. It's a lot. And unlike on our end, it funds programs and it funds positions. So we're not in a situation where if federal funding were cut off to the schools, there would be that would really be cause for a scramble. And so we are working, the superintendent and the team over there is part of this, response team that we set up. We have a response team that is a whole of government response that includes the superintendent. We meet on at least a monthly basis, and we've been meeting since before the election to talk about what's going on here. The school side of things is just a little harder to get my hands around because that level of threat is potentially existential. So I can't put a number on it, but it's serious.
The list
John?
still, we still working down the list or?
No, that,
No?
We've got everyone on my list.
All right.
got everyone
I
on my
may.
list. John?
Yeah, thanks. Well, just jumping back to the discussion that was earlier about the school situation and the, you know, $8 million gap in the current budget. I did some back of the envelope math earlier today based on the FTE numbers that are in the various budget books going back 3 years. And essentially what that tells you is that this budget built around an $8 million gap has roughly 90 more FTEs in it than existed in the school budget from 3 years ago. And if, for example, instead of 90 more FTEs, there were only 10 more FTEs, you'd pretty much take care of that $8 million deficit. And 10 more FTEs is more than they had, you know, is more people that they had 3 years ago, during a time when enrollment has increased very little. So I don't think that's an unreasonable scenario to offer as an alternative to a budget that has an $8 million gap in it and 90 additional employees over what the schools were functioning with very perfectly well 3 years ago. So I hope people will think about that. I hope that the school department will address that kind of reality, but you know, that's up to them. I had a different question, which is on a very particular subject, and that's the Davis Avenue footbridge, which I see in the budget. There is no money this year, but $500,000 has been spent by the town so far by my, you know, look at the books from previous years. And what it says in the budget for FY26 is no money to be spent on that. And it furthermore says that this has not yet been programmed by TIP, which, you know, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the Transportation Improvement Program that funnels state funds or state federal funds to local projects. So a couple of questions. If we don't ever get TIP funds, are we prepared to go the distance on a $13 million footbridge project? And furthermore, how long do we expect to wait before we, you know for sure if we're ever going to get those TIP funds? Because it's been quite a while that people have gone without that footbridge already.
So the CIP is currently assuming that the town is fully paying for the Davis Path footbridge. I have that built into the debt plan. I'm hoping that a grant will alleviate that and free money to do other projects. But right now, it's taking up capacity in the CIP.
Is there, well, I don't know who to ask this question of, but it feels to me as though we might want to do a reckoning. If we've been thinking about this as a project that would get TIP funding, and then it turns out it's not going to get TIP funding, it feels like we should revisit. Do we still think it's a project we can afford to go ahead with at $13 million? Nobody, when we first conceived of this project, thought it was going to be a $13 million project. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there are other projects looming in the out years of the CIP that likely will try and compete for this capacity as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, somebody better ask
Yeah,
questions or I'm going to
I
ask
have-
more. You are.
Yeah,
I have one
Davis.
I listened to Mr. Brown's comment about that there was a decline in school spending as a percentage of the total. And I would point out that there's been a more significant decline in enrollment, and there's actually been an increase in the spending per pupil, out of scale to the overall increase in budget, overall increase in the town's budget. And so, you know, there's the old saying, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. I think you have to be really careful about what sorts of comparisons you make. And I think that per pupil expenditures are a far better indicator of what we're spending on education than looking at percentages of the total in a situation where enrollment fluctuates.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Well,
John?
no, but Paul, go ahead.
No, well, I just wanted to make sure that, it sounded like, Sarah had said that she heard the request for a, maintenance level of service budget. I don't know if we need to send a formal request to the school committee or to the superintendent, but I just want to emphasize that, this is so important to understand. How much money does it take to just keep doing what we're doing? Frankly, it might be too much and we still have to make cuts, but it would be helpful to know what that is before you have to start doing, a lot more work to find efficiencies. And I will say, I've dug into this quite a bit, and I don't want to cause anybody any grief, but, the K through 8 cuts, there's been nothing really suggested at the high school. And I know there's some conversations about that. That may be happening, but, from this parent's standpoint, the last place we should be touching is student facing. And again, this is probably more appropriate for me to be speaking at a school committee meeting, so I don't mean to take the time of the select board. But anyway, so I'm going to leave it at
Okay,
that.
Sarah? And then Jesse Hefter has his hand up.
So what I did mean to say earlier, and I guess I didn't say it clearly enough, is yes, I think that that's a really good way of looking at this is what would be level funding. And I thought that I was prepared to say that tonight. And then what I meant to say was I spoke to our chair today, and he was saying that he thinks that we need to do more work in order to really determine that. So I wanted to say we will answer that, and it will be later.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Jesse?
Thank you. Yes, Jesse Hefter, School Committee. Just wanted to echo Sarah's comment about the fact that, and to respond again to Paul's comment that we are and have already asked for a level funded budget. It just hasn't appeared in front of us yet. We hope that will be soon. And that we are looking, Paul, to your point, at obviously the highest priority items we're looking at are ones that are not in any way student facing. How far we'll be able to bring the gap down, we'll know in the next week or two. But I want to point out that the budget that we were given was obviously pretty shockingly high in terms of its deficit. And we're working sort of around the clock to try to understand all the different elements of it. And I'm really going to predict right now for you that we're going to be able to make some significant changes there.
Thank you. John?
Should I?
If
Mike,
you
seem to-
insist.
If I insist.
I'm
over.
done.
Okay.
Do you have a long list?
No. I just, I felt a little awkward about coming back in so soon. So another thing that is very much on my mind and very much an element of this budget is our spending for street rehabilitations. And we do have a line item in the budget, $5,130,000 in town funds. But what I don't see in the budget is within that $5,130,000, how much are we going to be spending on actual resurfacing of roadway? And I've seen budgets, and in particular, one in a neighboring community that get down to the specifics of, for example, in this budget, the town will resurface blank lane miles or blank square yards of material per year. They go into how that will be done, what method of repaving. Then they say the estimated cost per lane mile for resurfacing is currently, and fill in the blank, or more per lane mile, and they explain how they do that. And then they come to a finish saying target funding for street resurfacing. The actual street resurfacing is, and they have a dollar amount for actual street resurfacing, and then they go into the streets that will be resurfaced. And if that exists in the budget, I apologize to everyone for this long question. I don't think it does. And so and I shouldn't be looking at Melissa, because, you know, it's more a DPW question. I think we should have that in our budget. And I don't think it's impossible to get it between now and when we actually bring this budget to town meeting.
Yeah, I will say that those types of conversations typically happen at the advisory committee level. And, you know, I don't want to commit Commissioner Shute to something that she's not
No.
ready for. But I think we can express to her that, you know, when she presents to the board that you're looking for more detail on the level of investment in the roadway account.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, and I think related to this, because John, you and I talked maybe last week a little bit about a similar subject. So I think if I remember, one of the things that you had mentioned was you were wondering how much money was going towards design work for like the Washington Street corridor or the bridle path versus how much money was actually going into pavement.
Right.
And Chaz, or Melissa, does the design work come out of the CIP or is that coming out of the operating budget?
So the town's contribution to the Washington Street project is a separate line item in the CIP. So 800,000 in fiscal 26.
It's in the CIP. And what about the bridle path design work?
So the bridle path, I believe that we have a federal earmark that is a piece of that.
Yeah, 2/3 is federal and then
Yep.
there's,
We had previously committed ARPA funds, but given the time constraints around getting obligations in place, we ended up needing to swap the ARPA commitment for the CIP. So we took CIP money that we were planning on spending in the roadway account,
Yep.
used ARPA instead, and that freed up $1 million in the CIP to provide the bridle path work.
okay, so the point is the design work is in the CIP and the number that John quoted, although.
$1 million. I think we've
Right.
appropriated the first $1 million.
But it's,
The
but
first
it's,
$1 million.
but it's not, but it's coming from the CIP is my
Yeah,
point. So
yeah.
the number that you're worried about, the 5 million asking the detail, that sounds like it's probably more pavement and concrete. than it-
Well,
I'd
maybe.
like to know what the
Yeah,
detail.
maybe because, you know, I don't see lane miles specified as to how many lane miles we're going to, you know, get for this money. And where will those lane miles be? And by the way, the same thing applies to sidewalks. And then there's, you know, like a separate category for speed bumps. You know, how much are we going to spend on speed bumps? How many speed bump installations will we get over the course of a year?
Yeah, and I think that, you know, given that the policy is evolving too, I think that's a moving target as well. So I think we can try and get you the best information that we have, but I think, you know, the measuring the impact of a change in policy is going to be a lot more complicated than just simply picking up pavement and putting it back down again.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Chaz.
No, I'm just
Oh,
gonna say,
okay.
that's really what you know, when DPW gives its budget presentation, we can obviously have that discussion. But it is going to be two different things. It's going to be under the current policy and it's going to be under the revised policies that then break out, you know, complete streets reimagining versus repaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, have we exhausted everyone's questions and comments? Let's move on to the next item on our agenda.
Jesse Hefter did raise his hand.
Oh, Jesse again? Okay, Jesse?
Thank you. Just to Mike Sandman's point about enrollment, the budget book for the school department lists the fiscal year 25 enrollment at 7,089 and the fiscal year 26 at 7,153, which would actually be an increase of around 60 students. And so while it's true, if the cost goes up significantly, the cost per pupil will go. If we get more towards a level funded or less deficit oriented budget, then the price per pupil may not be increasing as significantly as was mentioned earlier. Thanks.
Bernard? before
Yes.
we go on.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So you outlined this is Dennis Dowdy, Chair of the Advisory Committee. At the start of this section of the meeting, you outlined the high-level process and the responsibility of the Select Board. The responsibility of the Advisory Committee will be over the next several weeks. The Advisory Committee subcommittees will be holding hearings on each of these departmental budgets. They are public hearings. They're open to the public. You can come and make statements and you should reach out to our subcommittees through the contact information on our website if you have questions or comments that you'd like to share as part of that process. The entire schedule is available from the advisory committee's website. You can see when both the subcommittees and the full advisory committee will be hearing each of those budgets.
Great, thank you. And those are hybrid meetings, in case someone doesn't know that. Okay, I'm sorry, Mike.
Sorry, that just brings up a quick question. Has the state legislature extended?
No.
No, so hybrid may go away?
Hybrid may go, so,
Okay.
but again, it's not about, we're talking about what that looks like in practice. That's really more about, you'd have to have a quorum in person.
Right.
We could
Yeah.
still broadcast meetings in hybrid
Yeah.
fashion. We just
Okay.
need to have
Half
meeting.
plus one in the room.
Right.
Yeah, and I think Dennis was really speaking to the sort of broad population of residents,
Yep.
you know, who should be participating in this process, so. Okay, so that concludes this discussion. It's been very helpful, in my opinion. The new Expenditure and Revenue Committee, I hope you've absorbed the discussion so that when we start meeting, we'll be able to start at a fairly high level.
Thank you, Chaz and
Thank you.
Melissa and Charlie.
Thank you.
And thank you. Advisory
David.
Committee.
David Mark.
David Mark.
David Mark.
Yeah, and David Mark, right?
We have one more thing on our agenda?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
Months.
yes.
Loans for the MWRA.
Okay, could you take your conversation outside because we have one more item on the agenda? Yeah, where's my mallet? No, it's too late now.
It's a little.
Bang your head on the table.
A little.
Right.
Right there.
Okay, so next item is Massachusetts Water Resources Authority loans, question of approving an MWRA infiltration and inflow and local water system financial assistance and loan agreement packages, and authorizing the town administrator and director of finance to sign and execute the agreements on behalf of the town. Lincoln, why don't you?
Good evening again.
What this
Thank
is
you.
all about.
So I'm here tonight, and yes, Jay Hersey, the Director of Water and Sewer, is online to answer any specific questions that I may not be able to answer regarding the specifics of this project. What we're here tonight is to seek the board's approval to actually borrow from the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority for two projects. These are two distinct borrowings, but we thought in the interest of brevity, we bring them together. One is for sewer work. That would be a total of $1,609,000 in financial assistance, of which 75% would be a grant, $402,000 a no interest loan. And then that's for inflow and infiltration work to reduce that inflow and infiltration into the sewer system so that we have less effluent that needs to be treated. And the other $2 million even 0% interest loan that would support the water system is specifically for replacing lead service lines and evaluating the lead service line environment, within the town's water system. Again, that's the entirety of that is a no interest loan. So in both cases, that is the same very generous terms that the MWRA has offered in the past for water and sewer. There's certainly terms that we could in no way achieve out on the general market. One final piece is to just sort of be clear about the process. Both of these have both been approved by town meeting. So the authorization to borrow has been approved by town meeting. But as a reminder, the select board is the entity, the body, you have the authority to actually approve the borrowing itself. So again, happy to answer any questions, and I know Jay is as well.
Yeah, one question I have, lead service lines, those are owned by the property owner, right? Or
I'm going to turn that to Jay to answer.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. Lead service lines can be shared by both the town and by the private side. In Brookline, The public side is from the main all the way to the curb stop or to sideline or the limit of the right of way. And then from the right of way into the home is privately owned. Unless you live on a private
And
way.
we're,
or in
and we're
case that-
borrowing for the town's piece of that?
Correct.
Okay.
And if we need to, if we do discover lead, a lot of the funding requires that we replace it all the way into the house to make sure it's totally lead free.
Right.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, so two questions. All of this was payback for me, like how do we recover the cost? So if there is a lead line that needs to be replaced and you're gonna, clearly, I think you'd go all the way to the house. Do we ask the homeowner to bear a piece of that, or is the town paying for that?
The town would take care of that cost. Fortunately for Brookline, most of the town was built with iron pipe or cement line iron pipe. So we've actually found very little lead in the system. Although there is lead goosenecks, as they call it. And that was how they connected up the old straight pieces of pipe to the main. So our goal is to actually get rid of, all of those as we come across them. But those goosenecks are on the public side, not the private side.
Okay, and given the damage of lead to children,
that's a helpful explanation.
Know where it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second question is about the infiltration work. I assume, and I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, but do we get charged for how much outflow we have? Do they measure that? They do.
They do. Yep.
The answer is yes.
So I assume there's a payback. If we have less inflow, you're going to have less outflow, and we won't be charged as much, correct?
That's absolutely correct. And Brookline is actually probably the #1 community right now as far as reducing the amount of inflow coming in. And because we've done that, our sewer assessments have come down over the years. So we're actually saving money through this program.
Okay,
great. I always like to save money. John?
Let me just say, this is one of my favorite items because I discover how truly, confused I can get about things. It's kind of an annual ask, isn't it? That we've done this before.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, we were seeking to combine it this time to sort of save some of your time. We had done it in different pieces in the past. I believe the last time we borrowed from the MWRA was in November of 2023. So we took a little break there because we did have sufficient funds to do the work that needed to be done at that time. And then this is coming back because those funds are being exhausted.
Yeah. So here's where I really display, my ignorance on this stuff. When you say we, who is borrowing the money? Is it the town or is it the water sewer department, the division, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. So they're general obligation bonds. So the town as an entity is responsible for them. As any bonds that we
And
issue.
who are they borrowing the money from?
From the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority.
And the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority is giving us a 0% interest rate on the borrowing.
For the water, for the sewer, it's 0%, and then but 75% of it is a direct grant that does not need to be repaid.
And why do they do that?
Then
nobody else loans money at 0% interest. Why do they do that?
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
I can explain that one. That one is it actually benefits them too, because it reduces, if we reduce the amount of clear water entering our system, it also reduces the amount of clear water they have to treat at the plant.
Yeah,
So
no,
it
I
also
mean,
brings
why do
down
they
their
only
costs.
charge 0%?
Yeah, it's subsidy from the state.
It's a subsidy. What we should be asking is, can we borrow enough money to build a school?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And we can't.
I mean, I think
And that's why MWRA was set up to subsidize these type of projects.
Yeah.
I think part of the answer is that the state's made a policy decision goal that these are two policies that it wants to support.
Why?
Just one other quick point, just to for complete clarity, hopefully, they are general obligation bonds that are backed fully by the town, but the premiums, the principal, well, there's no interest. The principal that payments are coming back from the enterprise fund, right? They're coming back from users, but they are backed by the town.
And so is this going to end up being one of those things that where we as select board members have to sign the thing?
Indeed, if you could all make sure that you
Yeah.
sign it after your presumed approval tonight, that
That's
would
the-
be great.
that's-
So we
that's
can get
the
the
real
documents
reason.
off tomorrow.
That's the real reason I enjoy this item is it's the only time in my life I get to borrow money at 0% interest and put my name on it.
That's
So,
right.
okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, we finished talking.
You in a hurry?
You never know around here. Okay, I move approval of the, let's see, how do we phrase this? I move approval of the MWRA infiltration and inflow and local water system financial assistance and loan packages and authorizing the town administrator and director of finance to sign and execute the agreements on behalf of the town. That good?
Second.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Michael Sandman.
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
David Perlman.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and that is the end of the meeting unless
We
anyone,
did have some folks who did not get to speak at the beginning of the meeting.
okay.
So first is Alex Neary. Alex, I'm promoting you now. If you can state your name and Brookline precinct number or address for the record and begin your 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Alex Neary. I'm in precinct 5. And I'm here tonight to raise concerns on a different topic, how zoning conditions and building code compliance is enforced in Brookline. It's not a topic that I bring up lightly. As someone who's been through the permitting construction process, I've seen firsthand how the enforcement of these regulations isn't neutral. It's not predictable and it's not fair. Rather than serving as an impartial enforcer of the rules, the building commissioner has been applying the code arbitrarily and often based on who's making the complaint rather than what the law actually requires. When I rebuilt my Brookline home, the building commissioner did not just enforce the code, he went beyond it, forcing us to make changes that were not compliant with the actual building code simply because neighbors requested it. When we presented clear counter evidence, including from our architect, that these changes were improper, we were ignored. The commissioner would not engage, would not discuss, and made it clear that he was going to impose his own interpretation, regardless of what the law actually said. Yet when I raised a clear violation about a neighboring property recently, where newly installed gutters were positioned to drain directly onto the public sidewalk, in violation of both the building code and zoning conditions, the response from the building department was delay and deflection and silence. The rules should be the same for everybody. My concerns were ignored, while neighboring complaints are treated as urgent matters. And I know I'm not alone in this. I've spoken with others in Brookline who've experienced the same pattern. It's strict enforcement for some, leniency for others, and even requirements that contradict the building code, all depending on who is making the complaint rather than the merits of the case. When a building official stops enforcing law and starts rewriting it to fit personal or political motives, the integrity of the entire permitting enforcement system collapses. If our building regulations are applied inconsistently and in ways that contradict the actual code, then they aren't really regulations at all. They're just tools for those empowered to impose their own agenda. The select board has a responsibility to ensure that all Brookline residents are treated fairly, and enforcement of our laws is consistent and impartial. I'd urge the board to look into how zoning and building codes are being applied and ask why some residents are held to a different standard than others, and to take action to ensure that the building commissioner is
30
enforcing
seconds.
written, not how he chooses to interpret it. It's not just about my case, it's about fairness, transparency, and accountability of Brookline's government. I appreciate the select board's time and consideration, and I hope this board takes these concerns seriously.
Alex, can you re-provide your address?
My address is 17 Hart Street. I'm in precinct 5.
Thank you.
And Alice, it'd be useful if you were to send us an email regarding your complaint.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. The next speaker that signed up in advance was Allie Kerr, but I don't believe Allie is on. Allie, if you're on, could you raise your hand using the raise the hand feature at this time? Are there any other individuals who wish to speak during public comment? There is one person in the room, 14 online, and no one else is indicating their desire to speak.
Okay, thank you. There are actually two people. We also count Sam.
Oh, apologize, Sam.
Although he has a special role in this, in the meeting. So, that ends the meeting. So,
Thank you.
let's go
Thank you.
home.